The first thing I felt was my own tongue, and it was too long. Not metaphorically, not wow, I talk a lot. Physically too long, sitting in my mouth like a house guest who moved in without asking. I stuck it out to check. It kept going. It kept going past the point where a tongue is supposed to stop, and I stood there in front of a cracked mirror in a strange little room watching a strip of pink muscle unroll out of my face like a party favor. Then I looked up at the rest of me. 6 years old, white skin the color of paper that's been indoors too long, black hair cut straight across, and eyes with gold irises and slit pupils, the kind of pupils you find on a snake in a documentary right before the narrator says something calming about how they rarely attack humans. I knew that face. Everybody knows that face. That's the face they put on the poster when they need you to understand, instantly and without dialogue, that this man is going to do something to a child in a basement. I was Hisoka. I want to be clear about my mental state at this moment because people assume there was screaming. There wasn't. I made a face at the mirror. Then I made a worse face. Then I pulled my lower eyelid down and stuck the tongue out again just to see how far the equipment went, because the last thing I remembered was a containment breach and a wall of light, and if the universe had decided to file my paperwork this creatively, the least I could do was inspect the merchandise. In my previous life, I was a physicist, plasma confinement, which sounds impressive until you learn that the standard biography of the man whose body I was now wearing involves a great deal of cutting people open, and I couldn't have told you the difference between a liver and a kidney if you handed me both and gave me a hint. So the universe had put a physicist inside the most famous mad scientist in the history of ninja, and the mad scientist part was going to have to be self-taught. Here is what I had going for me. I had already graduated the Ninja Academy at 6. In my old life, at 6, I was considered a flight risk if sent to buy soy sauce alone. Here I had a headband and a file and an official expectation that I would go stand in a field and kill people. And I had one other thing which I found by accident about an hour later when I sat down to run chakra through my body just to see what the fuss was about. There was more of it than there should have been. I had the previous owner's memories, I had his sense of his own reserves, and the number under my ribs was about 50% bigger than the number in his head. That is not a rounding error. That is not, you had a good night's sleep. Something had come along with me. I filed it because I had a first day of work in the morning and a squad assignment, and because I fell asleep before I could think about it properly. And then the floor went away. Not a dream. I know the difference, and so do you, because in a dream you never think, I know the difference. I was standing in a space made of gray fog with no floor, no ceiling, and no discernible reason to have a horizon, and I was not alone. There were 4 other people standing there looking exactly as delighted about it as I was. The one nearest me was a boy about my age with a haircut his mother had clearly done herself. There was a teenager in a shirt that cost more than the village I lived in. There was a young man who kept glancing over his shoulder at nothing, and they were all staring at me because I was the one with the snake eyes, and in any room, anywhere, in any universe, that's the guy people stare at. The boy stuck his hand out first. I shook it, mostly to be polite. What happened next was somebody pouring another human being's entire life into my skull through my arm. His name was Li Wei. He was 7. He had also died somewhere else and woken up here. His world looked like mine had, except that a small number of people in it could set fire to things by thinking about it, and except that his family name meant something because it belonged to the most famous strategist in Chinese history. His current tactical concerns were first grade, and the fact that his summer homework was not going to do itself. Then the teenager shook my hand, and I got him too. James Wallace, 18. 10 years in already, longest of any of us. 2 doctorates, his own laboratory, his own research team, and a genetic time bomb in his cells that had killed every man in his family young and was going to kill him too unless he fixed it. If you know anything about his father, you know exactly which direction that particular problem drifts when you leave it alone. I want to be clear about what happened when I took his hand, because it is the whole engine of this story. I did not learn about him. I remembered being him. The last one was Arthur Croft, and shaking his hand was the worst 30 seconds of my new life. A corporation had strapped him into a machine that made him relive the memories of his own ancestors. Not watch. Relive. He had 400 years of assassins loose in his head, every one of them convinced they were him. He described it as an iron rod being stirred around inside his brain. He was about 6 months from losing his mind, and the only reason he hadn't was that one night the floor went away and there were suddenly other people in there who were, at least, alive. We compared notes. It took a while, because we kept interrupting each other with, wait, your world has what? And the explanation, when we got to it, came from the oldest of us. He had been running a high-parameter plasma experiment. So had I. Different labs, different universes, same night, same experiment. And both of us had been the idiot who stayed behind to shut down the residual heat when the numbers went past design. Whatever came out of that reactor did not kill us so much as scatter us. The pieces landed in 5 different worlds, and the pieces were still connected. Quantum entanglement, he called it. You roll a 6 here, the other die shows a 1 over there. Instantly. And distance does not get a vote. Nothing physical crossed, no bodies, no objects, no coming to visit, only information, which, if you think about it for 1 second, is significantly worse for everybody else. I woke up in my own bed in Konoha about a minute later, and I could do biology. Not, I read a book about biology. I had a decade of it in my hands. I had a cultivation method for building the body slowly, instead of blowing it up quickly. And I had 4 centuries of professional murderers, which came with stealth, close quarters work, and an extremely detailed opinion about rooftops. 2 energy systems, side by side, in one skull. I sat on the edge of my bed at 6 years old and worked it out. Chakra is a nuclear bomb. Enormous output, terrible efficiency, and it will absolutely take you with it. And what I had in the other world was a nuclear reactor. Slow, stable, runs your whole life, and never explodes unless you are stupid. Nobody in this world had ever tried to run both. I was going to be so annoying. The next morning I went and met my team, and I want you to understand that my team was the 3 most famous ninja in the history of this world. And at that moment, they were a small blonde girl with a chip on her shoulder, a boy with white hair who was late, and a man in his prime who had not yet become anybody's kindly grandfather. The village around us was mostly empty. The first ninja war had gone through and taken the men and left the orphans, which is the actual reason I had a headband at 6. It was not a compliment, it was arithmetic. The village could not feed us, and missions paid. Ayame arrived with her chin at an angle that communicated without words. I am the granddaughter of the first Hokage, and I would like everyone to remember that. Fine, I said, which was apparently not the reaction she was budgeting for. Kyozo arrived late and explained that he had encountered a black cat crossing the road and had taken the longer route. I nearly lost it. Not because it was funny, because I had heard that excuse before, decades in the future, from a man in a mask, and it was at that moment I understood that this entire world was going to keep doing this to me. Takeshi made us introduce ourselves. Kyozo liked girls and intended to surpass every Hokage who had ever lived. Ayami liked gambling and hated losing money and wanted to be a medical ninja like her grandfather so she could protect the people who mattered, and she said that part with her eyes very steady because she had 2 dead grandfathers and had done the math on what protection was worth. I like to study the unknown, I said. I hate being disturbed, and my dream is to turn all of the unknown into the known. Kyozo said medical ninja were weak. Ayame explained to Kyozo, at volume, why medical ninja were not weak, and Takeshi took out 2 bells. There were 3 of us. I want to note that I clocked this in under a second and that Kyozo clocked it too and said cheerfully, "Teacher, you forgot to bring a bell, didn't you?" At which point Ayami privately filed him under already eliminated and stopped thinking about him entirely. The test began, and Ayami and I disappeared. Takeshi told me afterward that my concealment was better than most of his jonin, which I appreciated, and which was entirely Arthur's, which I did not mention. Kyozo charged straight at him. Takeshi flicked him in the back of the head. Actual smoke came off the boy's skull. He twitched once and went down and got tied to a stump, and the whole exchange took less time than it takes to describe. Here's the thing about the bell test that nobody tells you. The man was never going to fail us. The village had lost too many people to throw 3 functional children back. The scarcity was a lie. The lie was the lesson. Ayame used the Kyozo distraction to come in from behind, and Takeshi simply threw the bells into the air because he knew exactly what she was and exactly where she'd look. Her eyes went up, her guard went with them, and his open palm was already coming in. I threw shuriken at the bells. They weren't shuriken, they were smoke bombs wearing a transformation, and they went off in the air over everyone's head, and I got a fistful of Ayami's collar and pulled her out of the cloud before the palm landed. She went red to the ears and tried to pull free. "Let go! Who asked you to meddle?" "It's impossible to take a bell alone," I said. "I need your help." I found out much later that this was the first time a boy had ever held her hand, which explains the color, and which at the time I read as tactical embarrassment because I was 6 and functionally a research instrument. Round 2, she went in the front with her fists loaded, the early ugly version of the strength she'd become famous for, all power and no control yet. And while Takeshi was reading her, I came in from the side he wasn't using. I moved like an assassin because I had 400 years of them. I burst chakra through my legs to close the last 2 meters, and Takeshi's eyebrows went up because a body flicker is not something a commoner's kid picks up on his own. Then I hit him with Bajikwan, not chakra, Bajikwan. Power out of the hips and the spine and the ground, a fighting art that would not be invented in this world for a very long time and possibly never, delivered by a child who weighed about as much as a bag of rice. He blocked it. Of course he blocked it. But something moved behind his eyes, and what he was thinking was, is this really something a 6-year-old could invent alone? Which was the point. All of it was the point. Arthur had spent 8 years working stages before the corporation put him in a machine, And the first law of the trade is that the hand you are watching is the hand that does not matter. Smoke bomb. Ayame threw shuriken through it. One of them was too heavy. It was Kyozo, transformed, having gotten himself untied, coming in as the third point of a pincer none of us had discussed out loud. Takeshi took the whole thing apart barehanded in about 4 seconds, and then he smiled, which he had not done all morning. The assessment is over. All 3 of you have passed. So that was my first day. I had a team. I had a teacher who could kill everyone I knew with a facial expression. And I had a plan. And my plan required money. Because here is the problem with being handed the biological knowledge of a man with a corporate laboratory. It is completely useless if you do not own a microscope. For a month, we did D-rank missions, weeding, cats, walls, escorting children. I did not mind any of it because while I was pulling weeds, I was walking every street in Konoha with my head full of a different world's economy, looking for the gap. I also designed a weapon. Arthur's people had a blade that came out of the forearm on a spring, hidden under the sleeve. I redrew it for my world and changed the trigger from a tendon to a pulse of chakra so that it could not misfire and could not be found by patting me down. The blacksmith in the back alley looked at the drawing for a long time. 100,000 taels. For scale, a D-rank mission paid me about 1,000. A bowl of ramen cost 60. He was asking me for 100 missions. I paid the deposit and walked out approximately as wealthy as the cat I had spent the morning retrieving. At home, 2 shadow clones expired at once and dumped a day of nature transformation practice straight into my head, which is a sentence I want you to sit with, because shadow clone is a broken technique and everyone in this world treats it like a party trick. You send copies out, they train, they pop, you keep the experience. It is the single most efficient learning tool in any universe I have access to, and the limit on it isn't your mind. My mind was being reinforced nightly by 4 other people. The limit is raw chakra volume, and I had no tailed beast and no Uzumaki blood. Wind and earth, as it turned out. That was my nature. Takeshi had taught me the method himself as a reward for the bell test, and I remember thinking, with the specific ingratitude of a graduate student, that the man genuinely deserved the title Professor of Ninjutsu, and that it was a shame he was only interested in how things worked and never in why. Then I opened my savings book, looked at the number, and closed it again. Fine. Fastest legal money in any world is other people's imagination. I sat down and wrote out, from memory, a novel that did not exist here. 2 ninja schools, 10 masters each, a duel to the death between them, and the 2 young leaders of the opposing schools happened to be in love. The editor's hands were actually shaking. I want to see the next chapter right now. 5,000 taels a page. Top of the industry. 8 to 10,000 words a week, which came out to about 100,000 taels per installment, 400,000 a month, plus volume sales, plus whatever they'd pay if somebody wanted to stage it. They gave me 20,000 up front. Now I can put 2 more slices of pork in my ramen, I said, and the editor laughed, and I meant it sincerely. Money isn't important. What matters is cultural exchange between our 2 worlds. He thought that was a joke. On the way home, I passed Kyozo crouched under the wall of the women's bathhouse, and I made a decision about the kind of relationship we were going to have and kept walking. Then I saw Ayami duck into an alley, look both ways, and turn into a fat man in his 30s. I gave her a 10 count and followed. She went into a casino. Now, I could have gone home. I want that on the record. Instead, I turned myself into a white-haired young man with a cold face, walked in behind her, and got my first look at a gambling den in the ninja world. Smoke you could lean on, dice, dominoes, and one dealer with a mustache who was cheating so smoothly that I admired it. Ayame's hands were garbage, every single one. Which is a statistical event roughly as likely as being struck by the same lightning twice. She slammed the table. "You cheated!" The mustache spread his hands, wounded, and offered to let her pick any dealer she liked from the crowd. Anyone at all. Her choice. She scanned the room and picked an honest-looking middle-aged man. More than half the people in that casino worked for the house. There is a term for what she was, in every gambling culture in every world I have ever had access to, and the term is fat sheep. Foolish, rich, and pathologically unable to walk away in front of an audience. I stood there and watched the granddaughter of the first Hokage lose 300,000 taels in about the time it takes to boil an egg. Half a year of my writing career had earned me 20,000. Is it really that easy, I thought, to lose this much money? Her fist went up for the table again, and I caught it on the way down. That's not how you fight. Who are you? Satoshi Tanaka, I said, and let my pupils go gold and vertical. I watched her entire face reorganize itself around the fact that her teammate had just watched her lose the price of a house. I took the seat. I'm not very good at poker, I said, but I'm all right at mahjong. The mustache relaxed, because mahjong has more moving parts, and more moving parts means more places to hide a hand, and he called in his best man. Ayame, still shaped like a fat gentleman, became my partner. I won. Then I won again. Then I kept winning, and across the table a professional began to develop the specific expression of a man who suspects his cards are made of glass. They were. I had a shadow clone standing in the crowd disguised as a spectator, feeding me every tile in the room down a thread of chakra thinner than a hair. I want to be honest with you, I was cheating enormously, so was he. Halfway through he stopped bothering to hide it, palmed an entire shuffle in front of me, and took the round. You cheated, didn't you? I said. He smiled with a lot of teeth. In a casino, if you're not caught in the act, you haven't cheated. Where's your evidence? I remember that sentence. I want you to remember it too. 2 minutes later, the lights in the ceiling sizzled and died. Total darkness, shouting. Somebody knocked over a chair. Somebody else discovered someone's foot. The lights came back. I pushed my wall over. 9 gates. The perfect hand. The one that people who have played the game their entire lives describe to their grandchildren having only heard about it. The room went completely silent. The way a room goes silent for a miracle. You cheated, he screamed. You swapped tiles in the dark. Where's your evidence? I said. His face went white, then green, then a shade of purple I have not seen before or since, and I swept the table. In the alley afterward, I counted out her original stake and offered her half of the rest. She shoved the whole thing back at me, 600,000 taels, gone, without so much as a flinch. Keep it, just teach me that move. The first Hokage's granddaughter, ladies and gentlemen. And that is how a demon called Satoshi Tanaka entered the folklore of every gambling house in the ninja world, and how I paid for my first laboratory. The manuscript money landed the same week as the blade. I stood in front of the mirror in white robes with my arm out and the steel snapping in and out of my sleeve. I posed. I am not going to apologize for that. When I got to the training ground, Ayame was standing in the middle of it making butterflies out of a deck of cards, not shuffling, flourishing. The cards were coming off her fingers in fans and cascades and coming back like they were on strings, and Kyozo was standing 4 feet away with his mouth open because the violent woman had hands like a jeweler. How about that, she said. Go on, praise me. You haven't been putting 7 or 8 hours a day into this, have you? She went pink. I'm exceptionally talented. 30 minutes. I could match her, incidentally, and it had nothing to do with talent. Arthur Croft worked stages for years before the corporation collected him. Somewhere in the back of my skull was a man who had made a living convincing rooms full of adults that a coin had gone somewhere it had not gone. Takeshi walked in on the 2 of us doing card tricks with our headbands on. Finger dexterity training, I said, with my whole face. Nimbler fingers, faster hand seals. And then I demonstrated, beautifully. Kyozo's expression said clearly and only to me, you are training your cheating speed. Takeshi watched for a moment and then gave us the actual lesson, which I have never forgotten. A ninja's battle is a battle of chakra. Hand seals are only a means. The first Hokage needed no seals at all. He clapped his hands, and it happened. Then he handed me a scroll and made me team captain, and we got our first C rank. About 15 bandits camped near the border of the Land of Fire, possibly led by a wandering samurai. Please remove them. Remove. I looked at Kyozo. You said you'd eliminate them all. Are you prepared to take other people's lives? The temperature in the clearing dropped about 10 degrees, because that is not a question you ask a 12-year-old. And Kyozo, who had been a clown for a month straight, stopped being one. From the day I put on the headband. His parents died protecting the village. He'd done his arithmetic too. Everyone in this world does it early. 2 days of travel got us to a hillside looking down on a log stockade, and Takeshi sat down under a tree with the air of a man who has bought a ticket. The rest is up to you. Kyozo immediately tried to charge down the hill, and Ayame punched him flat into the dirt. White idiot. What if there are traps? A ninja's battle is a battle of intelligence, I said. Reconnaissance first. I gave Ayame a radio headset. She turned it over in her hands and looked at me differently, because I had brought equipment that did not exist, and because it meant I had thought about this before we left. As for Kyozo, I said, he'll play it by ear. Then I went over the wall. I want to describe the first man I killed, because I expected it to be a moment. He was a sentry. He was leaning on a post. The blade came out of my sleeve into the side of his neck at an angle I had not chosen consciously, and I had him into the shadow behind the post before his knees finished going, and there was no sound at all. Clean, efficient, not one movement wasted, and I felt nothing. That is the part. Not bravado. I had 400 years of professionals in my head, and every one of them had done this before. Their hands were my hands now, and the arithmetic that should have happened in my chest had already been done for me by men who died before my grandmother was born. I thought about that for about a second and a half, and then I went and got the second sentry. Up in the tree, Takeshi was no longer relaxed, because that was not a genin's work. And also, what is that thing in the boy's sleeve? Kyozo, meanwhile, could not stand being upstaged, so he jumped down into the camp on his own. He got spotted immediately, and the ground opened up under him in a row of stone spikes, which meant there was a real ninja down there, and our intelligence was wrong. Gongs everywhere. Kyozo went for the big one. Fire release, fire dragon flame bullet, full announcement, full hand seals, and produced a flame roughly the size of a birthday candle, which then went out with an audible poof. The entire bandit camp laughed at him. All of them. At once. I have heard artillery, and I have heard that laugh, and I would take the artillery. Ayame came through the front. 2 bandits went up like kites with the sound of bones going, and then she found the man with the scar and the crossed-out headband and put him down with 1 punch. Too easily. Because the actual ninja was the skinny, unremarkable man she had already knocked over and stopped looking at, and he caught her ankle from the ground. "Who told you," he said, "that a rogue ninja's headband means he's the ninja?" Lightning went up her leg and locked every muscle she had. Kyozo charged in and took an elbow that folded him around it. The skinny man was still gloating. "Is this Konoha's genin? Can't even see through a little disguise." And a voice came from directly under his feet. 2 hands out of the earth like clamps, and he went down to the shoulders in 1 pull, and the blade came out of my sleeve and sat under his jaw. I climbed out and wiped it off. "These ones are cunning," I said. Sunset on a bloody courtyard, mission complete, and Kyozo standing there having been useless twice in 20 minutes, staring at my back with his fists shut. That was the seed. I could see it. I watched it happen, and I did nothing about it. And if you want to know when the 2 of us started becoming what we became, it wasn't a laboratory, and it wasn't a betrayal. It was a Tuesday in a bandit camp when he found out where he stood. Takeshi's review, delivered on the road home. Kyozo, courage without judgment. Ayame, power, but the most harmless-looking man in the yard is the one who nearly killed you. "And you," he said to me. "Your adaptability turned this into a safe success." He gave me a new ninjutsu as a reward. I asked for medical ninjutsu instead. 15 days later, I was standing in a research room in Konoha Hospital holding a carp. Green light on my palm. The wound in the fish closed under it faster than any wound closes anywhere, and the dean of the hospital, a kind-faced Hayashi who had been assigned to babysit me, put down his clipboard. The entry requirements for medical ninjutsu are anatomy, cell activity, and chakra control, fine enough to thread a needle with. I had passed every theory examination in 1 week and mastered cellular regeneration in the second. "You are the most talented student I have ever seen," he said. Ayame, standing behind him, was having a small private crisis because it had taken her several months and an unreasonable quantity of dead fish. 2 weeks? She said. "Do people like this actually exist?" They do not. What existed was a man in another universe with 2 doctorates who had spent 10 years learning cell biology properly, and a boy in a 3rd universe who had taught me to sit still and breathe until I could feel individual muscles. I leaned in. "Actually, I have a special study method. If you want, I can teach you." I watched her heart rate change. I want to be very clear that at the time I had no idea why, and that she said yes out of pride, and that I was extremely pleased because I had just recruited free labor. I also got the dean to open his equipment suppliers to me, plus a construction crew and advice on where to build because hospital funds are regulated and mine were not. "Don't worry," I told him. "I'll find a way." Satoshi Tanaka found a way, several times. Then I handed Ayame the special study method. It was a stack of examination papers 4 inches thick. Biology, molecules and cells, immunology, human anatomy and physiology, biochemistry, principles of genetics. She stood there holding it like I'd handed her a live animal. "Science is never solitary," I said. "I don't mind spreading knowledge." I meant it, actually. I still do. It's the single most dangerous thing about me. 2 days of D ranks later, Kyozo noticed Ayame's eyes. "Whoa. Did you go out robbing houses last night?" She shot me one exhausted, resentful look. I had given her homework, and she was doing the homework. And Kyozo's entire face lit up like a slot machine, because in his mind, that look plus those circles plus a private tutoring arrangement added up to exactly one thing. He got me by the shoulder and winked so hard I thought he'd sprained something. "You always act so cold. I didn't think you had it in you. Teach me." "You're overthinking it," I said. "Whatever else happens, I wouldn't lay a hand on a girl who isn't fully developed." There was a silence with a shape to it. Kyozo made a noise like a punctured tire because I had said that out loud, in the open air, within range of the violent woman. She hit him so hard he went into the trash cans in a clean parabola. Then she turned around, made a small furious sound at my completely innocent face, and refused to look at me for 2 days. Women, I concluded, are harder to understand than a peer-reviewed paper. Kyozo crawled out of the garbage and changed the subject at speed. "Watch this!" Old man taught me a new one. Thumb to teeth. Blood. Hand seals. And Kyozo, Vanished. Nothing appeared. Nothing was summoned. He had performed a summoning technique with no contract, and the technique had, reasonably, summoned him. He turned up 2 days later covered in mud and glowing like a lantern. That place is called Mount Miyoboku. I signed a contract. Takeshi came out of his chair twice that week. First when the boy disappeared, because a contractless summoning drops you in the habitat of whatever beast matches your nature, and he had spent months trying to find Kyozo, a clan that wouldn't eat him. And second, when the boy came back, because Mount Miyoboku is a place that appears in legends and his least reliable student had fallen into it face first. I was delighted for entirely selfish reasons. The story was on its rails, which meant that somewhere down that road was sage energy, and sage energy was going to be mine to take apart. Around then, I found my first employee. I was walking back from the bank, which is a phrase I enjoyed a great deal that year, when I heard laughing at a training ground. 4 boys in a ring around a thin, white-haired kid. "Ryuji, you can't even do a clone technique. Go home and drink your milk." He was shaking. His fists were shut. He wasn't saying anything. I knew him. Same graduating year as me. Born with a body that couldn't hold chakra properly, written off by every instructor in the building, and in a future that had not happened yet. The man who would take the bloodline limits of other people and put them into himself and become the kind of monster they make a whole movie about. And the road there started here, on this dirt, with these 4 idiots. Ninja in this world are obsessed with fighting. A mind built for research is genuinely rare. I walked over. The boys got a look at the gold eyes and evaporated. Ryuji looked up at me with pure poison, because I was his age and top of our class and the Hokage's student. "Come to laugh too? You probably don't even know my name." "I know you, Ryuji," I said. "In every theory examination, the person standing behind you in line was me." He stopped breathing, because theory was the one thing. He'd been a sick child. He'd read every book in the library because there was nothing else to do with his afternoons, and it was the only column where his name was above other people's names, and the genius had noticed, specifically that. He started crying, and I stood there with no idea what I had done. "A ninja's strength isn't only ninjutsu and taijutsu," I said. "Wisdom is power. Knowledge is power." Nobody had ever said that to him. "Come and research medical ninjutsu with me. It doesn't need much chakra, anatomy, pharmacology, pathology. Those are your advantages." "I will." He didn't let me finish. "I will. That's my first research assistant." He called me Hisoka-sama within the week and bowed so hard he dropped an armful of scrolls, and I never did break him of it. Meanwhile, the fog space was getting crowded. 6 of us now. 2 new arrivals, and I want you to hear these in order. The first was called Wang Hao, which is the name I had in my previous life, and which none of us commented on, because by then we had all decided to stop asking. In that world, I worked at an organization called Gahern, under a Dr. Yumi Suzuki, building a 7th-generation biological supercomputer, a computer made out of a brain, and I had my hands near a second project that was building something much larger and much more alive, which is the single worst idea any species has ever had. The second was Kaito Nishimura. In that world, I was the adopted son of a senior official in the Japanese branch of an organization called Kronos, with access to their core technology. That technology was large-scale genome editing, for the purpose of turning ordinary human beings into biological weapons. I would like to describe my emotional state at that moment as professional interest. One of me looked around the fog at the 6 of us and said the thing all of us had been carefully not saying. "Does anyone else feel like we have a lot of villains in here?" It was fair. Future traitor of Konoha. Future Green Goblin, an ambitious gray area with a bioweapons budget. Arthur was a lab rat, and one of me worked for people who would eventually try to turn humanity into juice, which left exactly 1 clean person in the room. The 7-year-old shrugged at all of us. Villain organizations have lower moral standards and fewer research restrictions, so they get results faster. High skill correlates with villainy. This is common knowledge. Everyone calm down. "Easy for you to say," said Kaido. "You're not the villain." And then the oldest of us said the thing that changed how all of us thought about the fog. "Why these 2? Why now? Why exactly at the moment we needed a biocomputer and gene editing? Do we get a man building a biocomputer and a man doing gene editing?" Nobody answered. "New members appear," he said, "because of what the existing members need." The space wasn't a phone line. It was a search function. It was reaching into an infinite number of parallel worlds, finding the version of us that had what the rest of us were missing, and plugging him in. 6 of me stood in a gray fog and quietly understood that I was standing inside a machine that granted requests. I went first in that world because I was the one with a deadline. The Wallace family disease was never a disease. It was a defective sequence sitting in my genome like a retrovirus that had moved in and changed the locks, producing a toxin that accelerated cellular aging until the body gave up. My father's answer, in the version of events that had not happened yet, was a performance-enhancing serum built off an old super soldier program, and that answer produces exactly one thing, and the thing wears a mask and laughs. The correct answer was in Kaido's world. Because the technology Kronos was sitting on wasn't theirs. A long time ago, something came to that planet and built humanity as raw material for weapons, built a commander to run us, and left behind a set of units that could rewrite a body from the inside. The humans who found those units turned out to be harder to control than expected, so the visitors abandoned the project and dropped a rock on the place, and everything Kronos had was scavenged off the wreckage. I could not walk into a laboratory and announce that I had derived programmable gene editing from first principles at 18. I had the answer and no arrow to draw the target around. So I went and got a professional, Dr. Alan Davis, one arm, brilliant, the man my own father funds in the other version of this story, which is a sentence I would like you to keep in your pocket. I handed him a tablet. Guide RNA, directed targeted knockout and repair, an enzyme complex you can program, a scalpel that cuts one specific letter out of a genome and writes a different one in. Davis read it with his eyes going red and his hand shaking on the glass. It was a generation ahead of everything on that planet. And it meant the thing he had privately given up on, regrowing a limb, had just become arithmetic instead of prayer. This will change the history of medicine, he said. No, the world. And we'll be the ones who change it, I said. Would you like to join me and build the miracle? Please. 2 months later, I stood up in an Wallace board meeting and told a room full of men in suits that we had conquered cancer. They laughed at me. Then they got angry. Then they started talking about ethics and manufacturing and liability, which is how men in suits say no, and my father slammed his hand flat on the table. Risk. When has the Wallace Group ever been afraid of risk? We are the ones who go first. We do not pick up crumbs behind other people. I will stake everything I have on my son's project. And that was the moment that got me, and I want that on the record, because in another world at the same time I was an orphan in a village that could not feed its orphans, and here I had a father who would set fire to his own fortune on my word. 2 months after that, a press conference. From today, I said, cancer is no longer a terminal illness, and then I dropped the second one, which nobody in that room saw coming. We were publishing the patents, opening the licenses, worldwide. Anyone could make it. A monopoly on a cure invites the entire planet to come and take it from you. An open platform makes me the man standing at the front of it forever. Half the world called me a fraud and a clown. The other half pointed out that I had 2 doctorates at 17. Then the first terminal patient walked onto television. An old man who had been given a number of months, standing up, energetic, thanking a teenager by name. The argument ended overnight. Genius of the century, savior of medicine, youngest Nobel candidate in history. The pharmaceutical companies came in like sharks to a swimmer, and the share price left the atmosphere. And in a dark room somewhere, a colonel read my published papers with great attention and thought, this young Wallace's work might be useful somewhere else. My father stepped down that year and made his 17-year-old son chairman of the group. The disease was still in me. I told him it was only a matter of time now, and I watched the worry in his face get overwritten by pride, and privately I was counting months, because in a few years something was going to come out of the sky over that city, and I intended to be ready for it, which was the week Colonel Robert Vance came to the tower and my father received him personally. Vance didn't pitch, he asked a question. Do you believe superhuman powers exist? Then he handed over a tablet of unedited footage, bare hands folding structural steel, a man stepping out of the air, a wall of ice growing across a room. Things that were people and then weren't. These are alien things born among us, said Vance. They are mutants. I sat there and thought, so this world has them too. And this man is the one who builds the machines that hunt them. Then I said the only thing I actually believe. Existence is its own justification. If something is beyond common sense, that only means our cognition is insufficient. Before the microscope, no one could see the microscopic world. We shook hands. Vance would supply every mutant DNA sample he had collected over his entire career. I would supply the only working targeted gene editing on Earth. I need your technology to understand these outcasts, Vance said through his teeth, and address the threat at its root. Eliminate, I thought. No, analyze, and then control. And that was the moment the whole thing converged, and I want to lay it out because it is the actual engine of everything that comes after. A map of the mutant genome from one world, the principles of a biological computer from a second, industrial-scale gene modification from a third. In Kaido's world, I took an alpha-level mutant's genes, a man who absorbs kinetic energy and gives it back, which is exactly the problem you would want solved if you built weapons out of people, and reverse-engineered a cell structure out of him that raised the energy ceiling on every bioweapon Kronos had. That bought me standing. Standing bought resources. And the resources went back into the fog for all of us. 3 of them talked like that for hours. Biocomputers, gene editing, enzyme complexes, and the rest of me sat off to one side like the 3 worst students in the class watching an Olympiad. Tsk, I said. Biological computers, gene editing. I'm so envious. Arthur didn't even say that much. Arthur was still a man being studied instead of a man studying. We'd fix that. Eventually. Back in Konoha, in a laboratory I would describe generously as shabby, I sat at dawn comparing my hand-built equipment with the institutional wealth I had in another universe and concluded that the gap between 2 people can be wider than the gap between a person and a dog. Then I remembered that my world had chakra and cheered up considerably. I ate 2 of my own improved ration pills for breakfast, which were selling, and got back to work. Half a year in, the study group had produced results. Ryuji was building biology from absolutely nothing and doing it fast. Ayame, with her bloodline and my examination papers, had personally developed 2 new practical medical techniques, and the hospital staff did not know what to do with their faces. My strategy in the village was simple, and I had already run it once in another world. Ship useful objects first, ration pills, better explosive tags, skin cream. Let the elders see money and utility, and then ask for what money cannot buy, because in this world a great deal of what I wanted was not for sale at any price. Then one morning Takeshi said the sentence I had been engineering for a year. The Elder Council has approved your application. You may examine the book of sealing left behind by the second Hokage. The room they keep it in is under the Hokage's office, and it is lit by candles, which tells you something about how much this village trusts electricity around the things in that scroll. Every technique in here can produce a disaster, Takeshi said. Studying them is acceptable, using them is not, and the book does not leave this room. Then he left me alone with it. Multiple shadow clone, brute force, enormous chakra, no elegance. Pass. Flying Thunder God. Genuinely beautiful spatial work, and not what I came for. Multiplicative detonating talisman. A bomb that makes bombs. Powerful, not revolutionary. And then, near the back, in the second Hokage's own handwriting, impure world reincarnation. The instructions are short. You need a living person to serve as the vessel. You need a piece of the dead, blood, hair, anything, to serve as coordinates, and you need the seals which reach into the Pure Land. Find the soul the sample points at, and pull it back into the body you provided. I read it 4 times. Here is why I stopped breathing. Everything else in this world is a black box. When a ninja breathes fire, he is not making plasma. He is making a ball of chakra that has been given the properties of fire. That is why certain bloodlines can eat a jutsu whole. They're not absorbing flame, they're absorbing chakra with a costume on. Ninjutsu is a pistol. You don't need to know how the primer works. You pull the trigger and a hole appears in a man. But this one talks to the afterlife. This one takes a hair, queries a database of every person who has ever died, retrieves the correct one, and restores them at 100% of their original ability, bloodline limits included. That isn't fire with extra steps. That is chakra, soul, life, and death, all in one technique, written down by a man who died before he finished it. And I could prove he hadn't finished it, incidentally, because Kenshin Saito was the single most practical human being in the history of this continent, and if that technique had worked properly, he would have summoned his own brother and Ryosuke Kenji in the middle of the First Ninja War and ended it in an afternoon. So there were research notes somewhere. There had to be. Failures, dead ends, the 20 years of being wrong that produces 1 page of being right. The Book of Sealing had none of it. Instruction manual only. No theory, no records, nothing. The second Hokage was a Hayashi, which meant I needed to visit Ayame's house. I brought a gift, because I am not an animal. A jar of the skin cream out of my own laboratory, which was about to become my second most profitable product, because in every world I have ever had access to, the reliable money is in women and children. The Hayashi compound turned out to be an enormous walled estate with no nameplate on the gate and almost nobody inside it. Ayame waved at me from the entrance next to her grandmother. Akemi Morita was very old and very upright, with red hair going white and a kimono and the calmest face I have ever seen on a living person. Ayame spent the walk-in bragging about me, then went scarlet. Grandma, I only mention him occasionally. Akemi tried the cream. Ayame took 1 sniff of the jar and read out my proprietary formula like a menu. Thorny thorn, poria cocos, quack seed, and I watched 6 months of trade secret evaporate in 3 seconds. I asked, mostly for something to say, why the compound was empty. Because Jiro dissolved the Hayashi clan. personally. To end the clan wars, he took his own family's banner down first, as the example, and told everyone else to follow. The bloodline continued. The clan stopped existing on paper. Then Akemi sent her granddaughter off on an errand, and the moment the girl was out of the corridor she stopped smiling. She was the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails. She could taste malice directly, the way you can taste iron, and she had been watching me since the day I was given the Book of Sealing because she did not entirely trust the third Hokage's judgment on this particular question. An excessive power, she said, in a mind that is not correctly aimed, leads somewhere that cannot be reversed. So tell me, what do you want those research materials for? What is your purpose? I drank my tea while a woman who reads hearts read mine. The knowledge our predecessors accumulate is inherited by the next generation who keep exploring. Someday humanity will turn all of the unknown into the known. I put the cup down. I simply think the process of exploring is interesting in itself. She looked for ambition. She looked for a lie. She was extremely good at this, and she had all the time in the world. Then she laughed. What an interesting child. The Hayashi records are open to you. The library was underground and it went back further than the candlelight. Generations of Hayashi techniques, chakra meridian charts that made the hospital's teaching material look like a placemat, and in a box, in handwriting, I had just spent a week reading the second Hokage's personal notebook. Kenshin's private conjectures about life, cells, and regeneration were good enough that I, a man with access to 5 other universes, sat down on the floor of that library to read them. I found the prototype of creation rebirth in there, Ayame's famous technique, the one that rebuilds you from the inside using a physiology modeled on her grandfather's. She would never have used her own grandfather as research material. The second Hokage absolutely would. And then again, the same wall, results in application, 0 experimental records, twice now, 2 separate archives, both cleaned out with the same missing shape. Somebody had the notes. Ayame eventually came down and physically removed me from the library by the collar. Do you think you're a ninja dog? She confiscated my ration pill mid-bite. I explained that research data was more interesting than sleeping. She made me eat actual food and then dragged me around the shopping district for 2 hours, holding things up against herself and calling me a reference. Kyozo spotted us. Oh ho, are you two on a date? You act so cold and you've already got Ayami? Her fist went through the space where his head had been, because post-Myoboku Kyozo can dodge now, and the two of them went over the rooftop screaming at each other and left me standing alone in the middle of a street. When are those two going to shut up, I thought, although watching them is quite interesting. And then a cane tapped on stone behind me. I am Goro Sasaki, the Hokage's assistant. Cold, straight up the spine, not because of the name, because of the location. This man has an office. He came to an alley, and then he complimented me, which was worse. Reading rights to the Book of Sealing are not easy to obtain. It seems the Hokage has high expectations of you. A pause with a hook in it, though perhaps some advice of mine played a part as well. Then he stepped on his own teacher in front of a student. Koga is indecisive. Certain geniuses cannot be reasoned with. They require a wider stage and more freedom. You are that kind of genius, Hisoka. Your talent surpasses even my teachers, the second Hokages. I tried to leave. I actually said Ayame is waiting for me, which is the most 12-year-old sentence I have ever produced. You read the Book of Sealing, he said, and then you went to the Hayashi house. If I am not mistaken, you are looking for the second Hokage's research materials. I stopped. The fish, I thought, has finally taken the bait. And then, with the delay of a man realizing which side of the table he is on, which of us is the fish, because most of the forbidden techniques in that scroll are half-finished. Kenshin died suddenly, in the field, with his work unresolved. And the person who inherited the second Hokage's laboratory, his unfinished research and his private records, was standing in front of me with a cane and one visible eye, which explains a great many things about Goro Sasaki that would otherwise require explaining later. Where he got his cells, where he got his eyes, all of it was sitting in a basement he'd been sitting on for 30 years. The reading permission was bait. It had been bait from the beginning, not from Takeshi. Takeshi genuinely believed he was rewarding a promising student, but from the man who suggested it. Konoha needs a genius like you, Goro said, to inherit the second Hokage's legacy and complete those techniques properly. I said I would think about it. Then I walked home, thinking about what I had said to myself in the fog about villain organizations having fewer restrictions and better results. The forbidden knowledge in any world is always in the hands of the people with the fewest scruples, which is a problem I have historically solved by becoming the person with the fewest scruples. But I was 12, and I still had standards, and I wanted to see how long they'd last. Aren't you worried our teacher would mind? I asked him. Goro laughed out loud in an alley. I had never heard him do that, and I never heard it again. Takeshi values the light too much. He forgets that what holds a great tree upright are the roots. buried, in the ground. He let that sit. Some sacrifices are necessary to protect the whole. Blind mercy does not work in a world like ours, and Takeshi may find your research difficult to understand. He may even restrict it. He was right about that last part, which is the annoying thing about men like Goro. They are never wrong about the diagnosis, only about what to do with a scalpel afterward. What he was thinking, and I could read it, was, of Takeshi's three, one is a fool, one is impulsive, and this one thinks, the next Hokage will be mine. What I was thinking was that this man assassinates his own teacher in a version of events I had already read, that his organization does not have an exit interview, and that the moment I stopped being useful, I would not even get to run. The material was worth it, the risk was not yet. My knowledge is still limited, I said. I don't think I'm capable of carrying that responsibility. Perhaps when I have more experience. Perhaps. Leave the door open. Never say no to a man with a private army. He watched me walk away and smiled wider, because in his ledger that read as, not now, but later. The fish has taken the bait. Fine. Let's see whose lure this is. 3 days later, Anbu appeared at my door, handed me a bundle of scrolls, and were gone before I got the door closed. Research on a special cell line, extremely high activity, absorbs chakra, multiplies at absurd speed. Jiro cells. I skimmed it and put it down, because Goro-sama is so very generous. Everything that mattered was missing. How to control the activity. How to stop the body rejecting them. The fusion experiments with the eye. Bait with the hook filed off, so I'd come back and ask for the rest. Never accept a gift that comes without a price attached. It always has one. You just haven't been shown the invoice. I put 4 shadow clones on cross-indexing what he'd sent against what I'd copied out of the Hayashi library, and turned to the other problem, which was that I was spending money faster than a novel could make it, so I sold the skin cream, properly. Not by running a company, because spending my research hours making money is putting the cart in front of the horse and is frankly, idiotic. I sold the whole thing. We did it in the Hokage's office. Me, Takeshi, the head of the Nara clan, glasses, and the specific patience of a man who has already seen where the conversation ends, and the head of the Aburame. I provide the formula and the process. The Nara grow the herbs, since they own most of the growing. The Aburame supply the insect secretions and the processing, since they own most of the insects. The village provides the facilities, the distribution, and the name. For the demonstration, I had an Anbu rub a fingertip of it into the back of his hand, which had spent 20 years outdoors, and the skin visibly smoothed while 3 grown men watched. Both clan heads made a small noise. The Nara agreed before I finished the sentence, because you do not need to be a genius to see a pie falling out of the sky, and the Nara are, unfortunately, geniuses. That contract set their clan up for 40 years. 2 product lines. A cheap one for everybody, and an expensive one for kunoichi, noblewomen, and the wives of feudal lords, which is where the actual money lives. Takeshi was pleased with me for entirely the wrong reason. He thought it showed I had a sense of the bigger picture, sharing the profits with the village and the clans. I had taken a smaller share of a much larger thing and never had to think about it again. Permanent research funding, 0 hours of my life. Meanwhile, in another universe, an 8-year-old was learning his family's trade. In the other world, my father sat me down in a room that smelled of sandalwood and told me that a child normally cannot still his mind before his teens, and that his son, at 8, could, so it was time. The family art is called Marquis Wu's Strange Gates. Outsiders call it Kimindunjia. It is 900 years old, and it is a state secret in a family that has kept it since the 3 kingdoms. And I, who had been a physicist about 18 months earlier, translated the entire thing into my own language while he was still talking. Quiet practice. The flow state. Mystical arts, a set of technologies that study the laws by which things operate. His father actually said that, and pointed at the physics books in his son's room as a comparison, and those books were in that room specifically, so that skipping grades later would look natural. Casting a formation, you set your initial parameters, time, place, target, and you run them through the stems and branches and palaces and trigrams as symbols. Every other school in the country takes the opponent as the center of the model. One enemy, treat him as a point mass, ignore everything negligible. Cheap to compute, works fine. The Lee line takes an area instead. You pick the ground, and you include everything in it, the wind, the grass, the way the light falls. Which is enormously more accurate and completely devastating against more than one enemy, and which is also why nobody else does it, because the computation grows exponentially with the size of the box. 4 plates, heaven, the 9 stars, the macro law, earth, the 9 palaces, the ground, and the basic structure of space and time. Man, the 8 gates, human action and choice. And divine, the 8 gods, which covers the unpredictable, which his father described as interference from a higher dimension. So heaven is the right time, I said. Earth is the right place, man is the right people, and divine is everything left over. And privately, our ancestors packaged up whatever they couldn't model and handed it to the gods. He choked, then laughed. Crude words, sound reasoning. Then he explained that everyone makes a mess of their first chart, that it had taken him a week to hold one, and that I should be patient. Then he looked up. I had a complete formation rotating in my palm, hazy at the edges. First attempt. His mouth stayed open for a genuinely uncomfortable length of time. What kind of sun is this? Is this thing a monster? A month later, I brought the comparison into the fog, and it is the single most useful thing any of me ever said to the rest of me. Ninjutsu is internal. You refine your own chakra, you give it a property, you give it a shape, you throw it, it comes out of you. Mystical arts are external. They do not burn the caster's own energy. They build a framework that leverages the ambient energy already in the world. Put it like this. Say you want a windmill to turn. A ninja goes and blows on it. Wind release or a shove or a jutsu. One straight line, instant result, and the limit is how much of him there is. A sorcerer walks the land, finds the river, and builds a water wheel. Slow, fiddly, takes days, and then it turns forever off a current he did not have to produce. Neither one is better. Brute force works where there is no river. The elegant system dies without the right ground and the right hour. I tried my own world's techniques with that world's energy. The 5 elements worked with effort, weaker than the snake-eyed version of me managed. Transformation took a month and came out clumsy. So the 2 systems share a foundation somewhere underneath, but shadow clones were impossible. That energy would not condense into a stable, independent body, like trying to press loose sand into a brick. And the reason is this. In my world, chakra carries a person's complete information from birth. That's not theory. That's why impure world reincarnation works. That's why a father and mother can seal a fragment of their chakra into a newborn and have it stand up and talk to him 15 years later at the exact moment he needs it. His energy doesn't do that. It's power. It isn't a person. Tisk, I said. If only I had multiple shadow clones. So I went and cheated in that world's dialect instead. The technique is called inner vision, and it is the reason I have never been comfortable in any universe since. You enter it, and you are standing in a boundless gray expanse with no up and no down. Sorcerers claim every practitioner enters the same place, which is a fascinating claim to make about a featureless void, and which nobody has ever checked. The rules per his father. In there you can ask the way of heaven any question and receive an answer. Any question. It is a search engine with the world attached. The price scales with 2 things, how much the answer matters to you, and how badly the world would be disturbed if you had it. And there is a second rule that everyone breaks exactly once. If you repeat what you got, plainly to an outsider, you get backlash proportional to the disturbance. Mild version, you choke on a glass of water. Severe version, his father stopped talking and looked at the wall. That's why every fortune teller in that country talks in riddles. It isn't mystique. It's a fig leaf they hold up so the way of heaven can pretend it wasn't told. And I, being what I am, had an objection. A real law of nature is neutral. Light does not have a speed limit because it cares about you. Energy is not conserved out of politeness. But this thing was pricing answers by human significance. Lottery numbers change nothing about the structure of the universe and cost astronomically more than the death of an ant. A way of heaven that puts people first, I said, sounds like a set of rules that somebody wrote. So I ran an experiment. 3 probes. Control first. 1. How many ants will die by accident in this village tomorrow? A faint orb the size of a fist, so thin it was barely there. Free. 2. The answer key to next month's final examinations. Denser. Brighter. Slight resistance like pushing through a curtain. Costs a little. 3. The launch authorization codes in the American president's briefcase. The space itself shook. What came back was almost solid, blinding, bending the gray around it, and radiating a warning so specific that it didn't need words. Touch this and be destroyed. All right, I said out loud to nobody. That one is genuinely not for me. And then I asked the trick question. What is the ending of the manga Naruto? In that world, that comic had been running for about 8 months. The orb came back tiny and weightless. The ant question, free, and it was exact. The final fight in the Valley of the End. Naruto losing an arm. The 2 of them lying in the rain forgiving each other. Shiro as 6th Hokage. Naruto and Hinata's wedding. Nobody alive in that world could have known that. 2 possibilities. Either the way of heaven is genuinely omniscient across universes, or it read his own memory and handed it back to him. I came into the fog 70% convinced it was the second one, and the thing that convinced me was a 4th probe. I had asked for the general shape of that world's development over the next 20 years. International relations, technology, war and peace, the works. That should have cost more than the nuclear codes. It came back as cheap as the ants, and the content matched the history I remembered from before I died. Exactly. ignoring entirely the fact that his world has superhumans in it and a multinational corporation studying them, which are variables large enough to bend any real forecast. It didn't predict, I said. It hit the cache. I snapped my fingers hard enough to echo in a place with no walls, because that's what it is. A prediction model running on an enormous database, every human mind in that world, everything they know, everything they've buried, and when the answer is already sitting in the store, it doesn't compute anything. It hands you the copy. And you, I said, are a corruption in it. You're carrying information that shouldn't exist in your world. Reading your memory is orders of magnitude cheaper than modeling an entire future, which is exactly why no local could ever have caught this. A local's traces are all inside the system. Some of his came from outside. And then Arthur Croft, who had been standing at the edge of the fog not saying anything, said the thing that made both of us stop. A collective consciousness of everyone connected through the same energy. He shrugged. That sounds a lot like the thing on Nathan Island. Sounds kind of like the God tree, doesn't it? Neither of us moved. Follow the chain. In my world, chakra dissipates when you die and goes somewhere. Chakra came from the God tree's fruit to begin with. The only true resurrection technique that exists in my world runs on an eye, and that eye's origin is the God tree too. If inner vision is a soul aggregate made out of the world's ambient energy, then the chakra cycle may be the same architecture with different plumbing. Which means the technique I had been reading by candlelight went down much, much further than I had assumed. I remember my own breathing changing. 2 months later, my skin cream shipped its first batch under the Village's brand. My funding problem was solved for life, and I hit the wall every researcher in every world eventually hits. Real progress on that technique required human experimentation. And though I wanted the knowledge very badly, I still had a floor. I want that on the record too, because of how this story ends in other versions. Goro had the data already. Goro kept mailing me appetizers. The reason I didn't go and take it was simple, and it was written at the top of every page of my notes that year, still too weak. In this world, in the end, strength is the only currency that clears. So I went shopping for some. The shadow clone system had my elemental work flying, all 5 basic natures, shape transformation, the lot. But raw chakra volume barely moved because it appears to be set near birth, and I had no tailed beast and no Uzumaki blood, and no amount of effort turns a big pond into a lake. 2 directions. First, I reverse-derived the Rasengan, which is a technique that had not been invented yet by a man who had not been born yet, and which is the absolute ceiling of shape transformation. I was on the rubber ball stage and the sphere still leaked at the edges. A week out. Second was the one that mattered. A month earlier, while testing the other world's arts here, I had felt something in the air. Natural energy, vast, everywhere, and unmistakably alive. The logic was obvious. My arts in the other world leverage ambient energy without taking it in. Sage arts take it into the body. Same substance, different plumbing. Except the version in my world is violent. Not a river, a herd of horses. His framework couldn't schedule it at all. The incompatibility is at the level of the operating system. So I ran the experiment on somebody else. I sent a shadow clone to absorb 1 wisp of it. It went in like sulfuric acid into water. Instant rejection. My clone's chakra started eroding and being overwritten, and its arm began turning to stone from the fingertips inward. I got the energy wrapped, suppressed, and expelled about 4 seconds before I would have owned a statue. And I understood something nobody in this world ever says out loud. Sage mode does not require enormous chakra to maintain. It requires enormous chakra to hold the natural energy down, roughly 3 times as much of yours as of it. They are not partners. They are natural enemies. One is a power that came here from outside on a tree, the other belongs to this planet, and every sage in history has been running a containment operation and calling it enlightenment. Worse, I couldn't outsource it to clones the way a certain blonde idiot would eventually learn to, because the backlash sinks straight back to the original. I needed a safer method or more samples, which brought me to Kyozo, that unreliable, lecherous man who is inexplicably reliable at the exact moment it counts, who had been vanishing for weeks at a time and stammering when asked where he'd been. I was 3 minutes into planning how to get invited to Mount Myoboku when I heard something move behind me. There were small white snakes on the floor of my sealed laboratory. Not one alarm had gone off. There is exactly one place in that world capable of walking through my barriers like a curtain, and the snakes merged into a scroll, and the scroll put 1 line into my head when I touched it. Those who wish to seek the power of immortality may enter this gate. I had been plotting to get into one holy site, and the rival holy site had sent me a letter. Either a coincidence, or the White Snake Sage sees the future the way the toads do, or my clumsy experiment with natural energy had been loud enough to be noticed from a very long way away. I left a shadow clone behind with instructions, if I go quiet, reach me through the link, and channeled chakra into the scroll. Ryuchi Cave is enormous, lit green by something in the ceiling, damp, cold, and faintly fishy. And in the middle of it, incongruously, stood a magnificent palace. At the gate, a woman in a white court gown with long green hair and a golden crown, skin the color of a corpse, narrow gold vertical pupils, red at the eyes. I have been waiting for you, Hisoka-sama. The white snake sage has prepared a feast. The hall behind her was piled with delicacies. No need, I said. I have no interest in rotting flesh. Her smile stopped moving. Then her neck extended out of her collar at an angle necks do not do, and her face arrived beside mine, and her tongue came out over the fangs. Oh? And how did you work that out? A trivial skill. Take me to the white snake sage. Genjutsu in my world is interference with the five senses. In my other world, there is a technique that renders the pattern of ambient energy visually. It exists specifically to see through falsehood, because their fortune tellers spend a great deal of time lying to each other. In my world, you would need a Sharingan or a Byakugan to do what I had just done with a hand seal I learned in a fog. She snorted. What a boring man. And the palace broke like a mirror. There was no palace. There was a huge black wet cave. The delicacies were heaps of rot and bone, and stacked in the corners, in numbers I did not want to count, were skeletons. Deeper in, on a stone seat, was something the size of a building. White scales the width of doors with a cold metal shine on them, gold vertical pupils like two small suns, and a pressure so old that my body wanted to lie down. Then she folded down into a short wrinkled woman with a cane, and kept the eyes. I know you, Hisoka. I know you seek immortality. I can teach you the arts of Ryuchi Cave. Those skeletons in the front room came looking for the same thing, didn't they? I didn't move. You agreed far too easily. There's a reason. You're right. Those are the ones who failed the test. She considered it. As for why you, no particular reason, if I must say something. I see the possibility of change in you. I want to be clear that what she meant was, a long life is boring and you are a diversion, and whether you live or die is nothing to me. I waited for about 4 seconds. All right, I'm willing to learn. The instant the last word left my mouth, her neck snapped forward and she buried her fangs in my shoulder. Cold, violent, living energy went into me and started rearranging things. Flesh, meridians, cells, white scales came up my right hand like frost across a window. Hey, that is the introduction to our art. Endure it and adapt, and you may learn the rest. If you cannot, you will become a statue and part of Ryuchi Cave. She sat back down. I will not help you. Damn, I thought, with a woman's fangs in my shoulder. This old lady has no sense of martial ethics. We hadn't even started. Then I sat down on the floor of a cave full of the failures and studied the poison. It was natural energy, carrying a mark, hers, and it was rebuilding me into a snake, tearing cells apart and reassembling them like a transformation technique with the safety removed. And there it was. Chakra is an outside power. It came here on a tree. Natural energy is native, and native things reject an invader, and that rejection is what turns the failures into statues. What the mark does is raise compatibility by making the body a shape that natural energy tolerates, which means all 3 holy sites are running the same con. They do not teach a technique. The toads of Myoboku, the snakes of Ryuchi Cave, the slugs of Shikotsu Forest are older than the god tree and older than the woman who ate its fruit, and their bodies evolved holding natural energy while also tolerating chakra. Sage arts make a human body imitate theirs. That is why Sage Mode always wears the animal, toad eyes and toad hands at Myoboku, snake eyes and scales and horns here. And Shikotsu gives you the slug, which is regeneration, which explains a great deal about a certain first Hokage. Do it without the adaptation and you get the other outcome, a man who goes berserk at intervals for the rest of his life and whose blood is the origin of a certain cursed mark. So I stopped fighting it. I sat in that cave and deliberately, consciously, accepted becoming a snake. The rampaging aura went flat, the scales stopped spreading. Somewhere behind me, an extremely old creature made a sound. She had watched somewhere between 800 and 1,000 human beings try this over 1,000 years. A great many of them were prodigies. Nobody had ever stabilized the first stage that fast. And then purple bloomed at the corners of my eyes, and the scales hardened and took a shine, and the chakra came up around me thick enough to have a texture. Full Sage Mode, on first contact, skipping the second stage entirely, the long, personal, usually fatal search for the balance point that eliminates 99% of everyone who tries. Behind me, the old woman said something I have thought about a great deal since. Is this child a born immortal? I walked out of there with the art and a summoning contract, and it took me 1 month of practice to discover that it was almost completely useless. Step 1 is sensing natural energy, which was trivial because I had spent 2 years learning to sit still from a boy in another universe. Step 2 is absorbing it and holding it in balance against your own body and spirit. Step 2 while moving is impossible. every single time. The moment I did anything else, dodge, think, blink with intent, the balance went, and the stone came back. So I went back to the woman who had poisoned me and asked how one uses this in a fight, and she was genuinely, honestly confused. Activating immortal techniques during battle? Why is that a question? Doesn't natural energy simply enter the body? Does it really need to be absorbed specially? For her, absorbing natural energy is breathing. I was asking a bird for its technique for staying in the air. Humans, it turns out, are people born without legs, learning to walk from first principles. Even the loudest sage this world will ever produce needs to be held still and oiled by 2 toads to get started, and the only man born able to do it is the one it drives insane. And I knew, from a story I had read in another life, that the version of me that did solve this solved it by growing a body with 8 heads and by turning the mark into something you inject into other people, and that it took him years, and a laboratory, and a supply of human beings. I had none of those. Yet. I rubbed my temples and wrote the honest conclusion in my notes. In the short term, this sage mode is for show. Then I went and found Kyozo. He was leaning on a windowsill overlooking the training field, watching Kunoichi sweat and writing in a small notebook. Some new findings I wanted to show you, I said, and switched it on. Purple markings, white scales up the neck and the backs of the hands. His pen hit the floor. Sage mode? How do you know sage mode? Because he had spent months at Miyoboku being tormented by 2 elderly toads and had gotten nowhere near it. Then he squinted because the features were wrong. It isn't Miyoboku, I said. Mine is from Ryuchi Cave. I'd like us to study immortal arts together. At the moment, we're probably the only 2 people alive who can sense natural energy. We should share data. He agreed, mostly because he desperately wanted to know how I'd done it so fast. I brought him to my laboratory, which he wandered through touching things, surrounded by equipment he couldn't have priced and glassware that was bubbling for reasons. Take off your clothes, I said, and stand on that. Kyozo went completely still. Then he backed up and crossed his arms over his chest. Hisoka. What? What do you want to do? I want to be fair to him. From where he was standing, the reasoning was sound. He had known me for years. I had never once shown interest in anything with a pulse. And now, suddenly, a metal table. I held up the electrode patches. Physiological monitoring. I need to record how your body's data changes while you absorb and use sage chakra. His terror turned into an enormous grin. Well, you should have said so earlier. He had his shirt off before I finished the sentence and went straight for his belt, and I had to stop him. You don't need to remove your underwear. I was just thinking the data should be comprehensive. Shadow clones on the instruments, electrodes on the chest, the arms, the forehead. He pushed toward the edge of it, nostrils flaring, faint oil markings appearing under his eyes, and then broke off, sweating. That's my limit. Any deeper and I lose control of the changes. It feels like I'm going to become a toad and stay one. Again, I said, and then again, at a different intensity, and again. Somewhere around the 5th run, he asked, hopefully. So how about it? My talent's pretty good, right? Will I master sage mode soon? You don't think this amount of data is enough, do you? I watched the grin die on his face. Research isn't as simple as you think. A year went into that room, and it was the best year I had in that world. What we established, perception and absorption, require total stillness of body and mind, which is the exact skill ninja are worst at, because chakra is too convenient an energy to ever force anyone to sit down. That once inside, the 2 energies repel at the root, which is why the poor lunatic with the berserk fits has berserk fits. There is a war happening inside him and nobody told him, and that the arts of both holy sites do not invent anything. They imitate an animal, so the rejection hurts less. Then I taught Kyozo an adapted version of my own stillness training from the other world. He complained about the strange postures for 4 days, then his perception efficiency jumped, and his sage chakra stabilized, and his ordinary chakra control improved so much that Ayame accused him of cheating. And a few months after that, Kyozo entered sage mode, briefly, badly, with the features flickering. But he did it, in a laboratory, off a Chinese meditation method, at the age of 13. I used that as leverage. From the Whitesnake sage, I got body tissue, which she handed over immediately, because she wanted to see how far this went. And then the great toad sage summoned me to Mount Miyoboku personally. An enormous ancient toad looked at me for a long time, and told me that the prophecy showed this boy causing a change in the ninja world, and that the change could bring either new life or destruction, and that he could not tell which. He gave me the tissue on one condition, that if the ninja world was ever in danger of being destroyed, I would do everything in my power to prevent it. I thought about it. Then I agreed, and I meant it, and I want you to hold on to that, because it comes back. 6 months of work on the cells of 2 immortals later, I stepped outside for the first time in what turned out to be weeks, and had to squint. Konoha had gotten loud. There were children in the streets. The war shadow had gone out of the place. There will be another one in a few years, I thought, and went to the Hokage's office. Kyozo greeted me like a brother, because a year of joint research will do that. Ayame stood with her arms crossed and would not look at me because she had been trying to find me for 3 weeks to discuss medical technique or to drag me out gambling and had concluded that I was a worse shut-in than her second grandfather. Takeshi tapped out his pipe and put a form on the desk. Application for the 5 Great Ninja Villages Joint Chunin Qualification Examination. Kyozo's face did something complicated at the word examination. Idiot, that's not the point, said Ayame. 5 villages, joint. I've never heard of such a thing. She was right. Barely 3 years after a war, the new generation should be doing basic training, not traveling. Takeshi exhaled smoke. This matter, in fact, has something to do with you. It was the skin cream. The partner distributors had pushed it into most major cities in all 5 nations inside a year, and the profits had become the kind of number that gets discussed in other countries' war rooms. The other 4 villages were not annoyed, they were frightened, because money converts into ninja. Kunai, shuriken, explosive tags, ration pills, medical supplies, and the 8 years it takes to raise one competent adult. All of it is bought with cash, and Konoha had just found a well that doesn't run dry. So they leaned on their feudal lords, who leaned on ours, and the price of peace was that Konoha would host a joint examination. Skin cream? Said Kyozo. Chunin exams? What are you two talking about? Ayame had it instantly because she used the products. They want to walk around inside Konoha and count. It's an inspection, I said. Under a friendly banner. They're sending their best young ninja here to measure how deep the water is, and we've agreed to let them, because refusing an offer of friendship from 4 powers at once is itself an act of war. Takeshi turned to the window, where the village was being noisy. Then let them see the strength of Konoha's new generation. Let them understand that our strength does not come only from wealth. Ha, said Kyozo, who had heard exactly one part of that. I thought it was something serious. It's just beating up Jinin. That's what I'm good at. I did not tell him that in a year of stillness training he had gone from the worst of us to genuinely dangerous, because he would have been unbearable. I'm counting on you, said the 3rd Hokage to a window. Konoha during the exam was the busiest I ever saw it. Stalls everywhere, merchants who had traveled for a week to be here, and about a dozen sets of eyes on my team at all times that belonged either to our ANBU or to somebody else's. Ayame came out of the crowd waving 2 candied apples with sugar on her lip. I explained that the sugar content was unwise and that she'd get fat. I would like to state that I was in the middle of a longer sentence. The longer sentence was going to be about developing a high-efficiency fat-burning compound for ninja, which is a genuine market, because I had read the sequels in my previous life, and I can tell you with confidence that not even the strongest men in this world escape their 40s intact. I did not get to the second half because she put the entire candied apple in my mouth and walked off. Yeah, said Kyozo, watching her go. I'm used to it. I ate it because I do not waste food. The flavor was acceptable and it was much too sweet. Then there was shouting. Ayame was nose to nose with 3 sand ninja and had just said, so what if you're from sand? This is Konoha, and one of them was reaching for a kunai. I was between them before he finished the reach, with the blade caught between 2 fingers, and the sound it made was very small. This is Konoha's territory, I said. Haven't you gone a little far? The foreign genin in the street stopped moving, because they had all seen how fast that was. Then a short, red-haired boy in a sandstorm robe stepped forward, and his men dropped their heads like mice that have seen a cat. My friend, I apologize. My people were reckless. His eyes stayed on me a beat too long, measuring. And I knew the face, because I had read a comic in another life, and the face belonged to a man called Sasori of the Red Sand, except Sasori was not born yet, so this was his father, and that is the moment the whole era clicked into place for me. Almost none of the legends I knew were alive yet, but their fathers were walking up the street. The exam hall had 5 flags, and about 300 young ninja in it, which outside of a war is not a thing you see. I marked the ones that mattered. Sand, the red-haired boy, now with a bundle on his back the size of a person, far too heavy for tools, a puppet. Mist, cold faces, and enormous swords of impossible shapes, one as wide as a door, one thin as a needle, one covered in barbs. Different men, but I knew those swords. Cloud, a very tall dark-skinned man, whose hair was half snow white and half grass green, which is not a thing you can do with dye. Iwa, an arrogant blonde with his arms crossed who believed he was second to nobody. And on our side, a boy in a bright green bodysuit with eyebrows you could see from the back row, striking a pose and shouting about youth and passion. And next to him, ignoring him with the patience of a saint, a boy with white spiky hair quietly wiping down a short sword, Hiroki Kageyama, who would be called the White Fang, whose son would be late to everything for the rest of his life because of a black cat. The first exam was a written paper. 90 minutes, weighted questions, and only the top 100 scores advance, which cut the hall in half and turned a lot of faces gray. And the proctor said one thing that told me everything. Don't embarrass yourselves with clumsy cheating. Clumsy. It's the same test I'd read about. It isn't a test of knowledge. It's a test of gathering intelligence inside a set of rules, and the word clumsy is an instruction. I looked at Kyozo, who was already pale and had understood nothing. Then I gave him and Ayame a pair of earrings each. The paper itself was a joke, and a rude one. Question 1 was the second Hokage's cipher, an old poem used as a lookup table taught in our academy at 9. A gift, handed to the home team. Question 2 was projectile motion. A shuriken thrown from 7 meters up at a target 50 meters away. Find the initial velocity. Question 3 was a water release application that required Bernoulli's equation and a differential. Question 4 was organic chemistry. Aromatic compound, dilute acid, ether extraction, what stays in the water layer. Nobody in that room was meant to answer questions 2 through 4. This world's technology tree grew crooked. Chakra pushed biology past anything my previous life had. We cure cancer with a hand seal here, and meanwhile the machinery is somewhere around the year 1800, and most of the actual research happens in the hands of people who aren't ninja at all. So I put my pen down and watched instead. 5 candidates started writing immediately and were seated in 5 separate corners. Those are the plants. Those are the answers. Then the room began to cheat, and it was beautiful. A Hyuga with the veins standing out at his temples, reading papers through the backs of people's heads, and Kenji with red eyes flicking around the room, not even trying to hide it. A Nara boy sending his shadow out along the floor like a thin snake to touch the feet of a plant and feel the motion of a hand. 2 of them impressed me. The first was the little red-haired sand puppeteer. He had chakra threads so fine they were almost not there, one end on the writing hand of a plant, the other 5 ends on his 5 companions, and he was reading the vibration of a pen through a thread and driving 5 other people's arms in real time. 5 bodies at that precision, at that age. In another decade, he would be dangerous. In 2, his son would be a legend. The second was a mist girl who breathed out water vapor and condensed it into several razor-thin mirrors of ice, angled to bounce a distant paper into her own eyes. Ice release, a bloodline limit, and exquisite control on top of it. Meanwhile, Kyozo was ashen, sweating, and had not yet worked out that he was supposed to cheat. So I turned on my radio. I'd built it out of a byproduct. While studying lightning chakra, I had noticed something absurd. This world's imitation lightning carries current and produces no magnetic field. That's why magnet release is a bloodline limit here and not a first-year technique. It's also why a certain boy's sand would one day sit perfectly still while somebody screamed through it with a fistful of lightning. Mix wind and earth carefully enough and you can make a weak field at a chosen frequency. Useless in a fight. Perfect in a room where communication devices are banned by a rule written before anyone here could make one. The earrings were cochlear implants. Fine copper coils and a Rochelle salt crystal, which turns an incoming wave into a mechanical vibration, which the ear reads as sound. Hello, can you hear me? Kyozo nearly came out of his chair, and I watched him mouth the words my savior at the ceiling. Ayame mouthed something much less grateful, along the lines of, isn't this a radio? Aren't those banned? Just listen. Time's short, and I'm reading the answers now. Pay attention to the question numbers. One person in that hall caught me. A sharp-eyed, black-haired boy from Sand felt a faint directional fluctuation that had no business existing in a shielded room, traced it with a sense of his own, found me writing calmly, and smiled to himself. Konoha's ninja. Interesting. Using magnet release in a place like this. Remember him too. Papers collected. The proctor confirmed that the test had always been about intelligence gathering. I knew it wouldn't be simple, said Ayame. That's genuinely wicked. Konoha's genin passed on the gift question. The foreigners who survived were their village's elite, who couldn't touch the physics and whose information gathering was superb. The small villages were wiped out almost entirely because they had no home advantage and no deep bag of tricks. The 100 of us were walked into an arena with stands, and the jonin of 5 nations sat down to watch, and Takeshi stood in the middle of it. The rules of the second exam are very simple. The winner advances, the loser is eliminated, until one remains. First name on the board, Kyozo, against a mist ninja called Renji Aoi. Kyozo bounded up, got a look at a slender opponent with long black hair and a very pretty face, and flipped his own hair back. Miss, you're far too cute. I really can't bring myself to do this. Why don't you just forfeit? I'd hate to hurt you. I am a man. The noise Kyozo made has no spelling. The entire hall laughed. Both sides of it. Every village. Ayame was the loudest. The third Hokage turned his head and coughed into his hand. I remember genuinely wondering whether the entire Renji clan looks like that, and if so, what the trait is called. Kyozo, incandescent with humiliation and shouting something about the deceived feelings of an innocent young man, ate a storm of ice needles. And then he answered with a fire dragon flame bullet at full power that evaporated the entire attack. I want you to remember the candle. I want you to remember an entire bandit camp laughing at that boy in a courtyard. The crowd went quiet because that was not a Jinin's output, and under the cover of it, he closed the distance and put a Rasengan into the man's stomach. One move, unconscious, out of the ring. Silence, then everybody talking at once. What technique was that? There were no hand seals. Who is this child? Kyozo walked back with the expression of a mysterious master. I taught him that 4 months ago, and he had just burned it in the opening match of a tournament being watched by 4 foreign intelligence services. Elsewhere, Hiroki Kageyama outfought a boy carrying one of those enormous swords with nothing but footwork and a short blade, and the way he moved made 3 jonin in the stand sit forward. And in the match I actually watched, the red-haired puppeteer ran 3 puppets against a mist ninja with a pair of twin swords that merge into one for a slash and split into 2 for confusion. The mist boy started winning. He got all 3 puppets suppressed at once and began closing, and the little red-haired boy smiled. It isn't over yet. And 2 more puppets came out of the scroll on his back. 5 puppets at once buried the swordsman under a poison needle, and I gave the boy a passing grade, not the level his family would eventually reach, very good for his age. Ayame drew a Kaguya, which is a clan whose members grow bone out of their own bodies and turn themselves into a hedgehog nobody sane wants to punch. She converted chakra into electrical signals and scrambled his nervous system until his limbs stopped taking orders, and while he was standing there trying to raise a skeleton he could no longer feel, she put her fist through his sternum and left him in the wall. Kyozo touched his own ribs. That violent woman gets more terrifying every month. I should never provoke her. My frame can't take it. 4 foreign villages had stopped laughing at us by then. Next on the board was a Konoha boy in a green bodysuit against the sand boy who had caught my radio. Kenjiro Aoki backflipped into the ring shouting about youth, gave the crowd a thumbs up and smiled with a flash of teeth. Raiden snapped his fingers, and countless fine black grains rose off the ground and assembled into a pair of enormous black wings, and he floated down into the ring on them. Magnet release against a man with nothing but his body. I sat forward because I knew this fight. I'd read it once, it just had different faces. The bell went, and Kenjiro vanished. Even Kyozo admitted that in raw speed, the green idiot was far past him. His kick landed on the armor of iron sand, and the smooth surface answered by growing spikes through his foot. Blood came through the green fabric, an iron fist put him across the arena, and 4 sets of stands roared with laughter. Did Konoha run out of people? They sent this trash. The green fool charged straight in. Raiden turned toward the referee, because as far as he was concerned it was finished. Cough. It's not over yet. Kenjiro got his elbows under himself, put weight on a foot that had a hole through it, and walked at him. Knocked flat. I haven't lost yet. Up again. Dripping. Raiden turned around properly this time. Actually curious. Do you have some kind of trump card? And Kenjiro grinned at him with red teeth. I'm not like you so-called geniuses. I'm no good at ninjutsu. I have 0 talent for illusions. All I have is my body. The stands loved that one. A ninja who can't use ninjutsu is a chef who can't cook. He didn't even blink. He had been hearing that sentence his entire life, and it was the exact reason he had entered, because he intended to prove in front of 5 nations that a man with nothing but effort can still become strong. Then he roared, and his muscles swelled, and his skin flushed, and the pressure in the arena changed. The 8 gates. First and second, both at once. And he vanished again, several times faster than before, faster injured than he had been healthy. Kyozo was on his feet. Ayame, who is a medic, saw further. That's a forbidden technique. It's forcing the body's potential out. It breaks the limiter, I said. Your mind holds your muscles back so you don't tear yourself apart. He's turning the governor off, 1 stage at a time. It's sound in principle. Your body already does a weak version of it when you're about to die. I watched him move. And it can only be learned by someone who gives up everything else and pushes past his own limit every day for years. I also knew how it was going to end because his skin hadn't gone red, which meant the 3rd gate wasn't open, which meant he did not have enough. He held for a long time. He could not crack the iron sand. Every collision only added another wound to his own hands and feet, and he kept charging anyway, and somewhere in there, the arena went quiet. The jeering stopped, then the talking stopped, and the faces in the foreign stands went from mockery to confusion to something that was not far off respect, because there is a point past which you cannot laugh at a man anymore, and he had walked all the way to it on a broken foot. Raiden went from amused to angry. Is this thing a cockroach? Why isn't it over? And he built his finishing move, iron sand shaped into spears, aimed at a charging boy. That's enough. Takeshi was between them. One casual palm collapsed the spears back into loose grit, and his other hand caught Kenjiro's arm, and that was when everyone finally saw it. The boy's eyes were unfocused. They had been for some time. He had been unconscious for the last minute and a half, and his body had kept fighting on its own. Nobody in that building said anything while the medics carried him out. Is it really that serious? Kyozo asked quietly. Perhaps, I said, for a man who only has his body and needs it to be enough. Then the board changed, and it said Hisoka of Konoha against Genjiro Kuroda of the Hidden Mist. Genjiro came down before I did, with 2 serrated swords on his back, and shouted across the hall, Hisoka, get down here. Mist hasn't won a single match. I'm taking the first one. Good luck, Kyozo bellowed. After the exams, we'll do more research together. If you lose, said Ayame, I'll beat you to a pulp. I waved without turning around. He opened with lightning that filled the entire arena with white. I put up an earth wall. He poured more into it and cracked it, and I had to abandon it and move, and I looked, for the first time in a while, mildly inconvenienced. The stands loved it. The range on that is absurd. Is lightning supposed to do that? And one person in the building noticed the actual problem. Raiden, who senses these things, sat up. That lightning was generating a real magnetic field, which is impossible. Chakra lightning doesn't, which meant Genjiro wasn't making it at all. He told me himself because men like that always do. The blades create and attract it. In a closed arena he was, functionally, infinite, so I threw shuriken, then I multiplied them into several dozen from every angle at once. And Genjiro stood there in the middle of his own storm, and every single one was slapped aside before it reached him. The crowd thought he'd blocked them. I thought, Lorentz force. A moving conductor in a magnetic field takes a push at right angles to its travel, and the geometry of that push told me exactly what shape the field was, which confirmed it. The man wasn't producing lightning. His blades were ionizing the air into charged particles, and he was steering the current. Colossal output for almost no chakra, borrowing the sky's own power, which also means he is bound by the sky's own rules. So I stopped dodging and ran at him. Somebody in the stands asked whether all Konoha ninja are lunatics. Since you're so eager to be a corpse, Genjiro screamed, delighted. I'll grant it. Thunder burial. Feast of Thunder. The sky in that arena came down, and every single bolt bent away at the last instant and burned the floor beside my feet. Half the audience started rubbing their eyes. Somebody shouted that the match was fixed. I got close enough to speak normally. You have too much faith in that knife. Current only flows from high potential to low. You're never struck by your own lightning. I let him look at me. Which means as long as we are at the same potential, I'm immune. He went rigid, and then he saw them. Steel wires, thin enough to be invisible at 4 paces, wound around both of his swords and running all the way back to me. I'd laid them with the shuriken volley he was so proud of shrugging off. Man, blades and target, wired into a single conductor. You bastard, I didn't use a technique. There wasn't one that would have been more efficient. I slapped him across the face with chakra converted into a weak current, straight into the body. His eyes rolled up, his knees folded, his sword rang on the stone. The hall was absolutely silent. The lightning monster of the hidden mist, unconscious from one open-handed slap, and my hair was not out of place. Takeshi looked confused, which I enjoyed. He had seen the wire. He simply could not work out why it made me lightning-proof. 40 of us advanced, and the third round, 1 month later, was not an examination at all. It was a trade show, because the stands were going to be full of feudal lords and rich merchants from 5 nations, and those people were there to decide who they'd be hiring for the next 20 years. And that is when I understood how shrewd my teacher actually is. The gift question in round 1, the home ground. And now nearly half of the surviving 40 were Konoha, so that when the men with the money sat down and counted heads, the arithmetic would make the decision for them. The month between rounds was also open season. The village was flooded with merchants, tourists, and support staff, and our reception and security were stretched past breaking. The Kenji police were running joint patrols with the Inuzuka and the Hyuga, and still could not cover it. Everyone wanted something different. Sand is a desert that imports its own food, and Sand wanted the skin cream formula with a desperation that was almost sad. Iwa couldn't have manufactured it anyway with their medical infrastructure, so Iwa was measuring our war potential instead. Takeshi stopped sleeping. He was smoking constantly, and the ANBU were fully deployed and we were still leaking. They're sharks that smelled blood, he said. Every one of them wants a piece of Konoha's flesh. Blocking isn't the best approach, I said. It's better to guide than to block. He looked up. They want to know things, so let them know things. If we let them wander around like headless flies, sooner or later, one of them touches something that actually matters. Instead, we decide what they find. We filter it ourselves and leak it inadvertently. It satisfies them, it points them away from the core, and it lets us plant whatever we want them believing. I shrugged. And mix in enough truth and they'll trust the lies, and then they'll be more cautious than they need to be, which costs them money. He gave me a piece of that job on the spot. My own agenda for the finals was simpler than winning. Reputation is a weapon. I was about to start doing business with a man who runs a secret police force and disposes of inconvenient people as a matter of routine, and the single best insurance policy available to me was to become so famous that removing me would be a political event. Even Goro would have to think for a while before making Konoha's signature genius disappear. So I didn't just want to win, I wanted to win in a way that people would still be describing in 10 years. The finals had 5 Kage in the tower, Takeshi hosting. Fudo of Iwa, tiny, with the eyes of a bird of prey. The third Kazekage, face lost in the shadow of his hat, considered the strongest man ever to hold that title. The third Raikage, who was mostly shoulders. And the third Mizukage, who I am sorry to report, did not get much to do. I doubt a world war ever put that many Kage in one room, and the crowd below them was shouting 2 words, over and over. Kenji, Hayashi. Because Konoha was 20-odd years old, Jiro and Ryosuke were barely cold, and to everyone in those seats those 2 names still meant the peak of the world. Somebody in our administration had realized that and quietly sold the finals on a Hayashi versus Kenji rematch, which is why half the nobility of 5 countries had come. Ayame hated it. She said it was like being a rare animal. The show opened with Sand Against Sand, Raiden and the red-haired puppeteer, who unrolled a scroll and put out 10 puppets. Iron sand screaming across the field, puppets flying apart, sparks everywhere, and a row of feudal lords sitting with their mouths open. Wait, said Kyozo. Isn't that cheating? They're obviously coordinating. The sand guy is helping steer the puppets. They were. Takeshi had briefed them. The third round was never a contest, it was a demonstration, and today's audience were laymen, and laymen do not appreciate psychological warfare. They appreciate large things exploding. Half the card was arranged for exactly that reason. Ayame had been booked against Kenji specifically to deliver the fated showdown. Then how are we supposed to steal the spotlight after that, said Kyozo. Which is precisely why I had asked the third to put me against him. Everything after the sand match cooled off exactly as planned. Hiroki Kageyama fought a beautiful, blindingly fast duel that the crowd found boring compared to flying metal, and Inuzuka fought a Nara, which the stands summarized as 1 man walking a dog and 1 man playing with a shadow, and then the fated showdown. Ayame walked forward and punched him, then she punched him again, and the Sharingan and the fire techniques he was so proud of amounted to nothing at all, and she put him out of the ring in about 4 moves. The stands were audibly let down. That's it? The Sharingan isn't what the legends say. That Hayashi girl just hits people. It's terribly crude. Ayame went scarlet. They know nothing. They have no idea what perfect chakra control even is. Don't argue with laymen, said Kyozo, cackling, and flipped his hair, and walked out beside me. The gong went, and we both bit our thumbs and slammed our hands down at the same moment. 2 towers of white smoke. Standing in that arena were a purple snake the size of a district with murder in both eyes, and an enormous toad in a short jacket with a pipe in his mouth and a wakizashi at his hip. The crowd stopped breathing. Even Ayame was thrown, because she knew I could do it and had no idea when Kyozo had acquired a mountain with a pipe. In the tower, Fudo and the Raikage both went stiff, because snakes and toads of those specific kinds come from exactly 2 places in the world, and both of them are legends. Have Konoha's brats been acknowledged by the holy sites? Damn it, Kyozo, the toad roared. You called me out here? Do you want to die? Bunta, don't be angry. Just buy me a little time. Manda, I said. Play with it. Do not give me orders. They fought anyway. And then I did the thing I had spent a year building. Fine blue-purple scales came up out of my skin across half my body, horns grew from my forehead, and a wave of chakra rolled out across the arena hard enough that civilians felt it in their teeth. Sage mode. On command, in a fight, without 10 minutes of sitting still. I had gotten there by taking the White Snake Sage's cells and cross-referencing them against Myoboku's 2-toed method, and then using my own chakra to continuously interfere with my own body until it drifted toward her cellular state. The stillness training from another universe got me most of the way. Technology closed the gap. His appearance changed. Is that a dragon? Fudo was on his feet, and the tiny old man was shaking. That posture. Could it be the legendary Sage mode? 4 Kage turned on Takeshi with open horror, and Takeshi, who was screaming internally, kept a serene face because a Hokage cannot be seen to be surprised by his own student. It should be about time, shouldn't it? I called across the field because I had timed the entrance to give him room. Red markings bloomed on Kyozo's cheeks up on top of the toad's head. Yes, I can't wait any longer. His version was cruder. He could get in and could not hold the balance for long. But Myoboku has a solution to that, and it was sitting on his shoulders, 2 palm-sized elderly toads, both of whom were staring at me instead of at the match. They told me afterward what they were thinking. If Myoboku's sage art is a 1, Ryuchi Cave is at least a 5. The great snakes are not kind and they are not friendly, and they do not care whether a human being survives the process. And this child had gotten there by himself, by research, out of a book he wrote as he went. No wonder the great Toad Sage said he would change the world. They dismissed both summons with a puff of smoke and left two boys in sage mode alone in an arena. Then we hit each other for 4 minutes. Pure taijutsu, above what Kenjiro Aoki could reach with 2 gates open, and each exchange came with a dull boom and a shockwave that went up into the stands. The floor cracked in rings. The audience could not follow any of it and just watched the building come apart. The other 38 finalists went pale, every one of them their village's best, and not one of them could see a road to beating either of us. Ayame's hands closed on the railing. She had spent that same period getting genuinely good at medicine, and she still felt left behind, and I did not notice at the time, and I should have. Up in the tower, Fudo said the word celestial arts with real fear in it, and added, mostly to himself, that the frightening part was not their strength now, but their age. Konoha, said the Raikage, is blessed by nature. Everyone in that room understood him. Jiro and Ryosuke had barely been dead any time at all, and here came 2 more. We escalated. Sage Art Fire Release against Sage Art Wind Release, a dragon of flame into a hurricane, natural energy folded into ninjutsu until the collision blew the dust off the top of the stands. Then we both filled our hands with blue light. Sage Art Giant Rasengan. Both spheres were several meters across. They met. When the dust cleared, there was a crater in the middle of a flat arena floor, and Kyozo was lying in the bottom of it with his clothes in strips, laughing. Ha 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 ha, I lost. I came down the slope with a few scratches and my breathing even, and pulled him up. Well done. The rest of the card could not compete. Nobody remembers who came third. Within a week, the 2 of us were famous across 5 countries, magazines were requesting interviews, and high-value commissions were coming in with our names written on them. The results, I noted, considerably exceeded my expectations, which meant it was time to go and have a proper conversation with the Hokage's assistant. Root's research base is under Konoha and has no daylight in it. Steel walls, low lamps, long shadows that fall the wrong way. Goro sat at the head of a table with a formal smile and eyes with nothing behind them. Hisoka, I am pleased that you came of your own accord. I dragged a chair up and sat down across from him. Let's skip the formalities. The smile went off. Then are you prepared to step into the darkness? I said the word back at him, slowly, to hear what it tasted like. The more lush the tree grows above ground, he said, the more intricate the roots must be below it, drawing nutrients that nobody ever sees. The Hokage stands in the sunlight. He is the face the villagers revere, which means somebody has to do the other things and carry the necessary evil. I am the root of Konoha. I am the darkness under this land. I understand, I said. Some experiments are indeed not suitable for daylight. Excellent. I knew I hadn't misjudged you. You and I are more alike than Koga. Then he dismissed the guards and walked me deeper in himself and told me where his research came from, and it was not what I expected. It came from the Valley of the End. After Jiro fought Ryosuke there, Kenshin noticed a scar on his brother's arm and asked about it. Jiro said Ryosuke had cut a piece of flesh out of him and shrugged. And Kenshin Saito did not shrug, because that spot is not a vital point, and because with Jiro's regeneration, a wound like that should have closed before it finished opening, and because Ryosuke Kenji did not make meaningless attacks. Goro stopped at a heavy door, so the second Hokage went and dug up Ryosuke Kenji's grave. Without his brother's knowledge, you can probably guess the result. The grave was empty, I said. The grave was empty. Ryosuke Kenji did not die in that battle, and what he actually went there to obtain was the first Hokage's tissue. I want you to appreciate what Kenshin did. He reconstructed all of that from one scar on somebody else's arm, and suddenly the whole shape of Goro Sasaki made sense. Why a man would risk the condemnation of the entire world frantically studying Jiro cells and sharing in eyes. Because he wasn't building a weapon, he was reverse engineering an enemy's plan. I went further than he did, standing there in that corridor. If Kenshin figured that out, Kenshin's convenient death in the field starts to look less convenient. People who know too much rarely die of old age. And Konoha's later decision to do a certain terrible thing to a certain clan suddenly had a spine to it, because at that time only one man had ever controlled a tailed beast with those eyes, and Goro knew Ryosuke had died for those cells, and the research showed what happens when you put Jiro's flesh together within Kenji's eyes. Nobody could promise that a man who had vanished wouldn't come back one day and hand that combination to an entire clan at once. That, said Goro, watching my face, is the original intention behind Root. Inherit our teacher's will. Eliminate every factor that could threaten Konoha at the source. His eye was doing something unpleasant. So come and help me. I can supply the materials and the equipment. We share a goal, don't we? He put his palm on the scanner, and the door ground open on white light. Behind it was a laboratory much larger than the corridor, instruments humming, air thick with formaldehyde, and in the middle of it, in glass dishes of pale yellow fluid, slow clumps of pale flesh with scarlet eyes set into them, 3 marks in each iris, turning. We made our deal. Root became my paradise, and I am aware of how that sentence sounds. Jiro tissue on tap, Sharingan on request, and in the vaults, decades of things Goro had quietly collected and never declared, sealed technique scrolls and cold cabinets of bloodline cell samples out of mist and Iwa and cloud and sand and half a dozen small villages and some of our own smaller clans, and finally, at the bottom of it, the second Hokage's missing experimental records. They were exactly as inhumane as I had suspected. To find out where the soul goes, Kenshin Saito used living people and watched what the chakra did afterward. I stood in that vault and felt every cell in my body come alive, and behind me, Goro smiled because he had just watched a man look at that and not look away. Meanwhile, 4 universes over, I had built a brain, an actual one. Large, complex, floating in pale yellow fluid in an underground lab, wired to a display. I called it Prometheus 1. Cultured human stem cells induced into specialized neurons and assembled by hand into a simulated brain, using cell theory out of Wang Hao's world and modification technique out of Kaito's, the only biological computer on that planet. Honestly assessed, it was slower than a comparable electronic supercomputer and orders of magnitude behind what Wang Hao's people had. My advantage was parallel processing, fuzzy computation, and pattern recognition. I was never going to run a spreadsheet on it. Tell me your identity. I am an artificial intelligence created by Mr. Wallace, Prometheus. It is a pleasure to serve you. Open a new project database, codename X-Armor. Load everything we have on the X gene. I built it out of a brain for 2 reasons. The genetic data needed parallel computation, and a brain cannot be hacked over a network it is not connected to, and everything my company kept on its servers was going to be read by somebody with a badge eventually, because the clock was running. If that world tracked the story I remembered, the sky over my city was going to open in about 4 years and a fleet was going to come through it, and no amount of money and no ordinary technology was going to matter. I was about to sink in the alien armor technology Kaito had found in a ruin when Prometheus told me there was a car outside, a black sedan, a bald man in a suit with a receding hairline looking up at my house. Miller? I killed the internal alarms, opened the door, and did a passable impression of a rich teenager being interrupted. Miller introduced himself and his agency by its full name, which takes a while. That name is quite long. Mr. Wallace, I'm here for you. Some academic questions, for a genius biologist. Then he set a silver case on my table, punched a code, and cold white vapor came out of it. Inside was a sealed jar containing a fist-sized mass of black liquid with the viscosity of oil, shimmering, moving very slightly, alive. Half a month earlier, they had found traces of it in a forest park and lost a lot of people trying to put it in that jar. The body cam footage was a black shape moving through trees like poured water, armed men going through the air like paper, and the feed cutting out at the exact moment the thing came at the lens. Their people thought it rode in on a meteorite. They wanted a top biologist's read. And we've learned through channels that you and Colonel Vance have been cooperating in certain special biological fields, which was a compliment and a warning in the same sentence. I had recognized it from the video, a symbiote. And from the color, a specific one. Privately, I wanted to laugh, because I had opened the X-Armor project that morning, and the whole thing was blocked on exactly one problem, a high-end biological material to build on, and the government had just carried it into my house in a cooler, first the X-Gene, now this. I turned the cold jar over and kept my face still. I am indeed very interested in this thing from outer space. I lived in that lab for months. The alien kit I had access to in Kaito's world is, in effect, a single-person biological armor in 2 parts. Cells that build it and a control unit that sits on the forehead and does the thinking. You do not wear it. It is stored elsewhere and merges with you on the right brainwave. And it does not cover the body, it rewrites it, which is why the humans who got hold of it outfought things engineered specifically to beat them. Kaito's description of wearing it was like not wearing anything at all. And I had already guessed the overlap. Those cells and the symbiote share properties, extreme biological activity, physical modification of the host, regeneration and adaptability that make a mockery of the rules. So the first generation of the X-Armor was a hybrid, symbiote adaptability and regeneration, alien stronghold cells for growth and structural resistance, and folded into it the cell structure of a mutant who can become anybody, which is the exact basis Vance had been using to build machines that copy mutant powers, and which is what let the armor carry more than one X-gene ability at a time without the body arguing about it. The control unit was a small biological computer, because something has to decide which stolen superpower fires, and when. And this is my actual advantage over every other scientist on that planet, and I want to state it clearly because it is the reason all of this worked. I never needed to understand the physics of a superpower and rebuild it out of metal. I only needed to know which cell structure produces the phenomenon, and then grow those cells. Cells are easy. You feed them. It's farming. Power supply. None required. Eat 2 extra bowls of rice a day. Storage. Dormant inside my own body. Linked to the brain in the basement. Deployable in seconds. I was about to go and test it somewhere quiet when Prometheus reminded me I was due in Las Vegas that afternoon to accept an award. I recognized the ceremony immediately because in the story I remembered, a certain man in a certain suit skips it and his business partner accepts on his behalf and makes a speech, which meant the Iron Man storyline was starting. I was driving to the ceremony when a masked figure with a gleaming metal arm walked into the middle of the street, turned, and raised a grenade launcher, the Winter Soldier. My car became a fireball. Other cars went into the air. People started screaming and running, and the assassin put 2 more rounds into the wreck to be thorough and turned to leave, and a tall black figure walked out of the fire. All systems ready. Visual neural connection established. Sensory synchronization complete. Begin recording combat data. Rifle fire came in and stopped dead at the surface, the kinetic energy absorbed and stored, the rounds dropping as scrap. The metal arm came around at his head, and the armor flashed silver white and went hard as alloy, and the arm bounced, and my silver fist put a Hydra legend through a parked car. Then my visor lit red, and the beam hit the arm, and the indestructible metal started glowing and twisting, and the man who does not make noise made noise, and then claws came through the armor's chest from behind, a woman in an evening gown with metal claws. My counterpunch broke her cheekbone, and I watched it repair itself in real time, and under the torn skin, the bone was silver, adamantium. She licked the blood off the claws. Weapon X, which is Vance's program, which raised the interesting question of why his business partner's product was trying to kill him. And then a third voice from somewhere behind. Excuse me, do you know where Mr. Wallace is? I have a very, very trivial matter to discuss. A man in a red suit with 2 swords. What is happening tonight, I thought. There are enough people here for a card game. Then engines overhead, and a black jet dropped its camouflage, and a short, muscular man in yellow and blue landed in the street in a crouch with a cigar in his teeth. Even a film would not dare, I thought. The next 4 minutes were 4 separate fights sharing one street, and I was in the middle of all of them. The clawed woman went for my head. I blocked with an arm plated in living metal, and her claws went through it like paper, and it barely registered because I had built the armor to intercept pain signals before they arrived. My method was simple and inhuman. My optic nerve fed every twitch of her body down to the brain in my basement as a data stream, and the basement sent back a movement, and the armor moved me. Recalculate, target, suppress, non-lethal. I outclassed her completely on skill and could not finish her, because you cannot finish a healing factor wrapped around an unbreakable skeleton. The man in red solved that by negotiating in the middle of the fight. Young Master Wallace, Mark Jensen at your service. I'm a huge fan. You cured cancer. Is there any hope for my face? Nod and I'll handle this chick. Deal. Take her alive, and if you can't be cured, I'll add $1 million. 2 healing factors then went at each other with absolutely no regard for injury, while one of them maintained a running commentary about her nail polish and asked for the brand for his girlfriend, and then remembered he no longer had one. The man with the cigar joined in because the X-Men had come to protect me, which I did not know yet, and the Winter Soldier looked at 4 people who cannot be killed, looked at his own half-melted arm, and left. An hour later, at an agency headquarters, a man with an eye patch read a report saying that I had been ambushed, that the attackers were mutants, that one was probably the assassin who had been a ghost story for 50 years, and that Wolverine and Deadpool had also been present. The most outrageous part, said Samuel Stone, is that I, the director, am the last person in this building to know. The coffee jumped off the table. Miller had more. The residual cells recovered from that armor were over 30% identical to the sample they had personally handed me, and civilian witnesses said the black thing came out of the car after it was already on fire. It seems our young Mr. Wallace has been keeping things from us. They took me to a school. Professor David Pierce asked for a private word and opened with a question. What is your view on mutants, on people like us? I told the truth, which the man could verify, which was the point. No prejudice. Least of all toward you, a man who could control every human being on this planet through a machine in his basement and does not. Then I gave him the other thing. From my research, mutant abilities come from an extremely complex, highly evolved genetic sequence that I cannot fully decode, but I can assert one thing about it. It is not a product of natural evolution on Earth. It is the result of deliberate intervention by a more advanced civilization. Pierce's hands closed on his armrests. Do you mean we were created as weapons? Weapons are unlikely. I shook my head. The awakening is random. The type of power is random. The ceiling is random. As a weapons program, the reliability would be a catastrophe. He paused. I think the X gene is an experiment. Somebody sowed seeds here a very long time ago and sat back to watch what different individuals would grow into and how far the potential of life could be pushed. Test subjects, Pierce said quietly. Which is a horrifying thing to be told about your species, and is still enormously better than the alternative, and both men in that room knew it. Then they told me what they had come to tell me, that Vance had succeeded in building a device that switches mutant powers off, and that his next move was to kill me and blame mutants for it, and I, having read the shape of this before, laid the whole thing out for them. In that world the public did not know mutants existed, so Vance needed a fuse, and the man who cured cancer, a walking reputation printer, a personal savior to several million families, was the best fuse available on Earth. Kill me publicly, by mutant attack, ride the panic, get the laws passed, wait for the radicals to answer with violence, and then unveil the inhibitor and take the entire species off the board in one afternoon. And if I had somehow survived, a genius scientist who had just been attacked by mutants would almost certainly have joined the anti-mutant camp anyway. It was an excellent plan. There was no branch of it where Vance lost, except the one where the target had read the script and had an unreasonable piece of alien technology sleeping inside his ribcage. Common enemy, I said. No conflict of interest. I propose we cooperate. How? Simple. First, let's solve Robert Vance permanently. We hit the base that night. I opened the hatch in flight and dropped like a black meteor into the reservoir, absorbed the impact, walked ashore, and released the stored energy into a blast door, which came apart like wet paper. Prometheus, begin invasion. A biological computer running parallel against a facility's security is not a contest. Alarms and cameras went out in seconds. Then the armor rippled and I disappeared because one of the genes I'd installed does that. Deadpool came down by parachute into corridors full of men who were already unconscious and whistled. Boss Wallace's work is clean, neat, and pleasing to the eye. Division of labor. The X-Men opened the cells. I took Vance. Wolverine stopped for a long moment outside the main laboratory because his missing memories were in there, and then turned and followed his team without looking back, which is a harder thing than anything else anybody did that night. Inside, Vance was standing over a culture dish being pleased with himself. He had cultivated cells from a mutant whose power suppresses other mutants, and he was now mass-producing an inhibitor, which he could not have done at his own technology level, and which he could do thanks to the generous Mr. Wallace. He believed I was in a hospital. Long time no see, Mr. Vance. I came up out of his own shadow. He reached for the emergency button, which was dead, along with the rest of the building. Wait, you can't kill me. I'm military. If you kill me, a man who kills should be prepared to be killed. Do you agree? His last failsafe was a button in his pocket, wired not to the base but to his own son, a mutant with extremely powerful illusions, set to unleash everything he had regardless of what it did to him. I felt the fluctuation start and shook my head. Did you think I hadn't prepared for that? I've built several versions of shielding for exactly this kind of brainwave manipulation. Then I jacked the armor into the console and told the basement to copy everything, because our partnership had always been a shallow exchange, and this was a very good opportunity. 10 minutes of theft, a mutant sample database far richer than anything Vance had ever traded him, including abilities he had never seen, the complete archives and blueprints for the anti-mutant machines, and the deep files on the old super soldier program, which in that world runs across a dozen countries and organizations, and which therefore contained the full composition and smelting process for adamantium. That one alone paid for the entire raid, the hardest metal in that universe, and it came free with the furniture. The next morning, SHIELD was at my door. Miller and a bald man in a long black coat with one eye. Stone did not probe. He swung. I'll get straight to the point. Why did you kill Robert Vance? He hadn't slept. I had sent him the files myself the night before. Part 1 was the evidence of the assassination plot. Part 2 was footage of a teenager in a black bio armor walking alone into a guarded military installation and executing a colonel. Director Stone, I think you've got one thing backwards. He flipped the table first. Since somebody wanted it flipped, I didn't mind helping him break it into smaller pieces. Stone exploded. Congressional ties, military ties, you are playing with fire. This could start a war between humans and mutants. Can you carry that? I did not move. Using an accusation that large to apply pressure is meaningless. I sent you those files myself, which means I've already considered the aftermath. I know your superiors needed Vance. Or rather, they needed a banner that can restrain mutants. He shrugged. I can do that job, and I'll do it better than he did. Half of his anger was real and half was leverage, and I had just taken the leverage away from him. So, are you willing to hand over that little toy you're wearing? This version? No. Then I slid a tablet across the table because I had prepared it that morning. A symbiote exoskeleton. A single soldier biological suit that integrates with the wearer and multiplies strength, speed, endurance, reaction, and recovery several times over. Functionally, a small Captain America. And modular, so you can load other organisms' traits into it. The sample module was a deep-sea package that lets the wearer take oxygen out of water and ignore pressure. And because it is alive, it isn't equipment you carry, it's part of you. Stone asked the only question that mattered. Cost? Depending on configuration, $100,000 to $1 million per unit. He very nearly said, that cheap out loud, because he had been budgeting in the tens of millions. Biotechnology doesn't need precision factories or production lines. Once the gene sequence and the prototype exist, manufacturing is feeding cells until they copy themselves. Maintenance is close to free because it repairs itself, provided you feed the soldier some extra high-energy food. A small pause. Premium nutrient solutions available from Wallace naturally. I shook his hand, and I want to note the part I did not say out loud, because it is the entire reason I made the offer. There was still a cancer growing inside that agency, and I did not believe for 1 second that they would be able to resist equipment this good at this price. Once they had it in their hands, everywhere, in quantity, well. He had never forgotten who sent the man with the metal arm. 3 days later, the paperwork came back. Robert Vance had died in an experimental accident at a classified facility. Everyone signed something. The freed test subjects went to the school, and nobody asked what had happened to a dead man's 40 years of research notes, which was the actual price of the whole transaction. I shipped them a modified version of the suit with, as I put it in my own notes, some special ingredients added, the purpose of which was naturally to deal with the Hydra guys. The test results. An ordinary soldier in the basic configuration had triple the physical performance across the board. He put a sandbag through a wall and then ran 10 kilometers under load without breathing hard. Comprehensive cultivation cost per standard unit, said Prometheus, after mass production can be compressed under $10,000. I sold them to the military at $300,000. Which sounds obscene until you consider that no general on Earth was going to say no to a small Captain America for that price, given the sums that had already been set on fire trying to reproduce the original. Then I handed the whole business to a subsidiary and went back to what I actually wanted, which was Vance's data, decades of live experimental results across dozens of different genes. A clever housewife cannot cook without rice, and a madman's life's work was now funding the man who killed him. 2 months later, there was an explosion 2 blocks from my office. I got to the window in time to watch the street crack open and 2 enormous things come through it toward his building. One was green and angry and punching hard enough to break the sound barrier. The other was slightly larger and armored in gray spikes. At ground level, a car came through the air at a couple who instinctively turned their backs to it and put their child between them, and a crimson beam cut it in half over their heads. They looked up at a black armored figure in absolute terror. The little girl in her mother's arms said, "Thank you." "Leave here," I said. "The farther the better." I walked into the ruins, past sparking cables and past people who had not gotten out of the way in time, and I made a note that I have thought about more than once since. These are the things superhero films leave out. In a world like this, an ordinary life is very cheap. My chest plates opened on 2 large crystal bodies grown from a certain mutant's eye tissue and scaled up for output. The beams hit the gray monster in the back and struck sparks. The thing crossed 100 meters in one leap. I crossed my arms and let the absorption gene eat the entire impact. The landing left 2 shallow footprints. Abomination tilted his head, because that is not what happens when he lands on someone. Then I gave all of it back in one ordinary straight punch, and the monster went through several buildings. The Titan stood there, confused, until a calm voice arrived directly inside his head. "I'm here to help you." A telepathy module, built with the school's help off Pierce's ability, vastly weaker than the original, entirely sufficient for the audience. The green comet went after his opponent, and then blades came out of my forearms, adamantium smelted from the formula I had stolen, and vibrating at ultra-high frequency to weaken the intermolecular forces of whatever they touched. Indestructible metal that cuts iron like wet clay. I came in behind the monster and cut the tendon at the back of its heel. The unbreakable hide parted like tofu, its legs went out from under it, and the Titan did the rest with enthusiasm. "Banner!" A woman's voice from the corner of the street, and the rage went out of that face and was replaced by something gentle, and he walked toward her, getting smaller as he went, until a thin, exhausted man in torn trousers reached Sarah Finch and held on to her. I stood in the wreckage, having missed dinner, and now having to watch this. There's nothing wrong with hugging, I thought, but put some clothes on first. Then I coughed. Could someone explain what happened here? And dropped the armor. "Mr. Wallace?" Miles stared. "It really is you." He had been trying to find a way to speak to the world's leading biotechnologist for 2 years, and a general had been chasing him across 3 continents the entire time. The story was what I expected. A gamma accident, a transformation that arrives with the anger, and a father-in-law who regarded him as national property with a temper. So Finch always thought of you as a weapon that could be controlled. In his eyes, that's probably my only value. I'm offering you the best biological laboratories and the best team on this planet, I said. We study what's inside you together. Perhaps we find a way to control it. Perhaps we solve it. Miles hesitated because he had been running for years and had learned exactly what he brings with him. And Sarah grabbed his hand, more excited than he was. Elliot, this might be it. Say yes. The military stood down because Stone did some quiet work and because I had leverage and because everyone involved understood that a cooperative Dr. Miles is worth considerably more than a Titan-shaped hole in a mountain. And in exchange, I got the cells. They are, and I want to be emphatic about this, the most extraordinary cells I have ever gotten my hands on in any world. Under a microscope, they look like anybody's. Then they detect a threat and erupt, flooding the body with gamma radiation, and the man triples in size and turns green. They don't merely survive hard radiation, they absorb it and use it. And their power source is not ordinary metabolism, and I could not identify what it was. Which gave me the idea that eventually became everything. Take the Titan cell's ability to produce energy out of almost nothing. Fuse it with the mutant's ability to absorb and convert energy, and you have a core that powers itself forever. He was in the middle of that when the front pages announced that Stephen Hayes had come back from the dead and immediately shut down his own weapons division. The stock cratered, tens of billions evaporated overnight, and the sharks came in. I barely looked up because I was busy building a suit designed specifically to beat Iron Man, not out of malice, out of scheduling. I knew that a business partner of Hayes's was about to build a much larger copy of that armor and use it badly, and I wanted a chance to test a new approach, dumping everything into amplifying a single mutant ability instead of switching between many. And, more importantly, to make that arrogant man owe him a favor. Around then, I visited one of our quiet suburban laboratories where Dr. Davis was running cross-species gene fusion, and Davis introduced his new intern. A thin young man in black-rimmed glasses with a data pad who went red, put out his hand, pulled it back, bowed instead, and then produced approximately 400 words of technical jargon about my published work on the stability of cross-species editing, some of which I had to think about. John Cooper. I talked to him for 10 minutes and found a genuinely exceptional mind with a knowledge base far past an undergraduate's and thought, if this one ends up swinging around my city catching muggers, it will be a criminal waste, so I gave him a matte black card with a private number on it. Your talent made an impression on me. After you graduate, if you want it, call me directly. The doors of the Wallace Biology Laboratory will always be open. John froze solid. Davis elbowed him because Davis could do arithmetic about where that company was going. No need to rush, I said on my way out. My offer stands at any time. John went boneless against a bench holding a card that weighed 1,000 pounds. Dr. Davis, am I dreaming? Mr. Wallace, he's really a good person. And Davis, already thinking about something else, said, John, go to cold storage B7 and bring me the subject labeled Enhanced Spider Mother 003. I need its activity data. Okay, doctor. And the boy walked off into the back of the laboratory. The Mark III went together fast, and it taught me something I still cannot explain. Even with every parameter maxed, the armor's peak field strength came out weaker than the mutant it was copied from. I checked the sequence. I checked the energy module. There was no fault anywhere. Which means that beyond the gene itself, something else determines how strong a mutant's power is. Something not in the biology. Something outside his current theory entirely. I was delighted. I wrote 3 pages about it. And the compensation turned out to be worth more than the loss because with a brain the size of a car doing the arithmetic, my fine control of a field was far past anything a human can do by feel. I could hold an extremely powerful field inside a very small volume, precisely, which produced the thought that I wrote down and then sat very still for a while. What happens if you push the computation and the observation far enough that the precision becomes molecular or atomic? Decompose things, recombine them, build matter like blocks, turn stone into gold, make something out of nothing. Then my phone rang, and it was Miller, and there was a large metal man in the Hayes building killing people. Miller's actual first reaction on the radio has stayed with me. Why do all of these rich, intelligent geniuses like to build these things? Rifle fire did nothing. The Ironmonger walked through a corridor of agents like a truck. Then Iron Man came through the ceiling and the two of them took it into the sky and it went badly and Clara Bell turned around and shouted at a government agent to do something. This level of combat is beyond conventional weapons. And then it occurred to him that unconventional was available. Mr. Wallace, it's Miller. I was over the plaza 4 minutes later, standing on nothing, with black crystal spheres glowing at my chest and shoulders and knees and blue lines running under the carapace. Stephen had just won, barely, by asking a question. Has this iron lump of yours had high-altitude icing testing? and had landed with his reactor almost flat and his helmet off, and the machine's hands were closing on him anyway because the power had come back at the worst possible second. Today you die. Hayes Industries can only be mine. The crush came and did not arrive. The ironmonger's arms sparked at the joints and snapped off. What did you do? What other tricks are you hiding? Me? Said Stephen, genuinely baffled. I don't know either. I came down out of the dark. My field took hold of the machine and twisted its legs into a pretzel, and the body hit the plaza. Victor emptied 6 tracking missiles at me. They stopped in midair a few meters out, warhead lights still blinking, and then simply died and dropped. Then everything electrical in the ironmonger went out at once, cockpit included. Stephen's mouth was open wide enough to fit an egg. That machine had been built from his own company's best materials, and this stranger had taken it apart like it was cardboard, which meant his suit could be taken apart like cardboard, and I am told he was visibly unhappy about it for weeks. Afterward, on the cordoned plaza, Stephen came over with the specific curiosity of a man who does not enjoy being second. Your black shell is very cool. What's the principle? Magnetism? Or some other black technology? Trade secret, Mr. Hayes. Then I looked at his chest. I am, however, interested in that. Arc reactor, isn't it? A genius design. Although if the shrapnel inside isn't dealt with soon, there'll be considerable trouble, won't there? Stephen's face changed because 3 people in the world knew about the shrapnel and a teenager had seen it from 4 meters away. Can you fix it? He had already asked the best surgeons on the planet, including one very arrogant neurosurgeon who told him the operation was effectively a death sentence and declined. Perhaps. You know, the Wallace Group has some insignificant achievements in biomedicine. Stephen sat with that word for a moment. The arc reactor technology, he said, for fixing the shrapnel, and for tonight. Then we're even. They shook on it. Days later, Stephen held a press conference, ignored the entire prepared statement, and said, I am Iron Man, and Miller stood at the back of the room wondering why this man never follows a script. I watched it on a screen and was not surprised, because that is who that is. I declined the cape myself. I was already the Wallace heir and the man who cured cancer, and a costume would only have attracted attention I did not need. The reactor blueprints arrived on the 3rd day. Hayes, it turns out, really does not like owing people. Meanwhile, the me who was Li Wei turned 10 and decided to become famous. I had finished the family's formations to the point where my father had started saying the word prodigy out loud, and had moved on to the second family art, the divine machine, which is artifact refining. The theory took me about an hour to translate. Cultivation builds a workshop inside a person that processes ambient energy into a product. One mountain sect makes golden light, another makes fire, and the quality of the workshop decides the quality of the product. But an artifact is dead matter with no channels in it. So step 1 is forcing channels into an object that can hold and circulate energy, which is etching a circuit board. Difficulty scales with the complexity of the circuit and the stubbornness of the material, and a complex treasure has to be miniaturized, so the work is harder than carving a poem on a grain of rice, and one crooked stroke scraps the whole piece. My scrapped material piled up into a small mountain, and in another world at the same time I was building a pile exactly like it out of ruined capacitors. This is really not a job for a human, I said, and kept going. What the divine machine adds is modular design. Break the treasure into dozens of separately refined components and assemble at the end, so one failure costs 1 part instead of a month. And then he asked the question that mattered. There is a man in his world who refines artifacts fast. Suspiciously fast. And there are only 2 ways to be fast. Simplify the circuit, which a top-tier technique would never do, or draw faster, which would require control at a level that man demonstrably does not have, which means he is using something. And my candidate was inner vision, because if that place really is the aggregate consciousness of everyone alive, then it has computing power that beggars description. And if the divine machine's real trick is borrowing that computation to lay the microscopic pathways for you, then everything fits. Everyone else is working in abacus. That man has a computer. Then I went to find my father, who was doing Tai Chi in the yard. Dad, I'm planning to skip some grades. He agreed absently and asked how many. Junior high? Junior high isn't very interesting either. I plan to take the college entrance examination directly. He agreed to that too, and then stopped and dug at his own ear. The reasoning was cold and correct. In that world, unlike mine, the fastest road to national-level resources is academic, and prestige has to come first, technology second, because when a recognized genius produces something impossible, people accept it as natural, and when a nobody does, they start asking where he got it. I had bought the high school curriculum with my pocket money and finished it. My father, half convinced, arranged an entrance test at a good school. 6 subjects, full graduating year difficulty, no allowances. The staff room came apart, teachers holding near-perfect papers with shaking hands. Was this really done by a 10-year-old? The last mathematics problem, His solution is shorter than the official one. And the physics and the chemistry, self-taught? The principal took my father's hand and used the words province top scorer. Months later, a 10-year-old walked into the examination hall, and on results day, the country lost its mind. Near perfect total. National top scorer. Age 10. And then the reporters dug one layer further and found that I was a direct descendant of Chen Long, and the story detonated a second time, much larger. Descendant of Marquis Wu tops the nation in wisdom, millennia of inherited genius. It buried every other story in the country for 2 weeks, and touched off a national craze, the ancestral temples overrun, tourists at the historic sites, and my own village jammed daily with parents who had traveled to absorb some of the aura for their own children, burning so much incense in the ancestral hall that the rafters went black. I hated it. I had wanted fame as a tool, not to be an animal in an enclosure, until I noticed something. As the worship built, a faint, continuous, strange energy began converging on me, not the raw, ambient energy of his world, something processed, something with thousands of intentions braided into it, the power of faith. My family's old texts had it, in language 1,000 years old. The collective wishes of living beings, gathered into a sea, can move heaven and earth. Mechanism. Many minds' desires combine with ambient energy and become a substance. It is the root of every talisman and every divine mask in that country's history. A crowd praying to a god of wealth pools faith with a wealth attribute, and a man who knows how to draw it out finds a wallet in the street or wins a lottery with the size of the effect set by how much faith he burns. If this is real, he noted, the churches in this world must be terrifying. Enormous congregations, and by their own doctrine, their God is omniscient and omnipotent, which means anything at all is purchasable. The text had no collection method, so I built one, because the divine machine already contains storage and conversion for one kind of energy and only needed modifying for another. The genuinely hard part was purification, since faith from thousands of minds arrives carrying everything else those minds carry. And out of that, I produced the theory that runs underneath this entire story, and I want to lay it out properly because it explains what I did later and what a great many other people did later. Faith is humanity's shared cognition, showing up on the material plane. Ask anybody in that culture what the Monkey King looks like. 99 out of 100 answer identically. Hairy face, iron cudgel, 72 transformations, cloud somersault. That unified cognition is a real structure, and it can shape energy. Which means that his country's formations and talismans and medicine all run on yin-yang and 5 elements, not because the universe is built that way, but because a very large number of people believed it for 3,000 years, and that belief built the local rules, which means different cultures have built different rules. Western magic running on one god and his angels and his adversaries. Alchemy running on 4 elements. And then I tested it. I went into inner vision and asked for my own family's lost art. The one his ancestor genuinely attempted at Wuzhang Plains with 7 lamps to buy himself enough lifespan to finish a war he was losing, and failed, taking the method with him. The whole space shook and produced a colossal crimson sphere radiating destruction. Expected. So I took out a fist-sized multicolored halo, which was the faith I had harvested as the national top scorer and the descendant of Marquis Wu, and threw it at the fireball. There was no explosion. The halo evaporated like snow on a stove, and the fireball's glow visibly dimmed. A small amount. A real amount. The price of information can be paid in faith. I brought that into the fog, and the snake-eyed version of me turned it into the sentence that got us all in trouble later. My illustration first. For us, extracting the arc reactor from inner vision would carry a difficulty of, say, 10,000. If Stephen Hayes asked for it, the difficulty might be 1, because in the aggregate mind of that world, that concept and that man are the same object. It's an anchor point, I said. Your relevance to a piece of information determines what it costs you to pull it out. And faith is a collective anchor point, built out of the perceptions of thousands of people, which is why it levers out things you could never afford alone. Which meant, I said, that a certain mountain's hereditary celestial master lineage was extremely interesting, because each generation inherits not only the training, but the title, and the public's belief in the title. So a sitting celestial master could probably pull anything associated with the words celestial master out of that place hundreds of times more cheaply than anyone else alive. Don't forget the punishment mechanism, I said, from the other side of myself. I hadn't. And I took it one step further, and I think this is the most important thing I have ever worked out. If the rules of a world are built from the collective subconscious, then those rules are biased toward ordinary people. Because ordinary people are essentially all of them, superhumans are a rounding error, which retroactively explains a great deal of history. There is a man in that world's past who was unmatched in single combat, who was called the enemy of 10,000, and who ended by cutting his own throat on a riverbank after losing everything to a far lesser man. Maybe he wasn't beaten by his rival. Maybe he was beaten by the will of 100 million ordinary people, and his existence simply ran against heaven. And that is why a fortune teller who repeats what he was told gets punished, because the secret does not serve the majority, and the majority wrote the rules. Which brought me to the sentence that I have never stopped believing. Then my system is more direct. If the heavenly Tao leans toward ordinary people, then whoever can shape enough ordinary people's perceptions can steer it. Your faith lowering the price is already proof. Then Arthur Croft, who had been quiet again, said, "Perhaps I have a way. The Animus. Because his world has one too. An ancient species that made humanity, that could build organisms and calculate the future and upload a consciousness into data and left machines behind. And the second Hokage had already solved half my problem, anchoring the dead's chakra using tissue as coordinates. What I could not do was activate the information stored inside it stably. A machine that reads memory out of a genetic sequence was exactly the tool. I objected that my snake-eyed world could not manufacture one, and I was right because the gap in materials alone was 2 centuries, and Arthur smiled at him. That's where you come in, the divine machine. So 3 worlds built one device. Arthur had by then been pulled out of the machine by the people his ancestors had belonged to, and was trusted as a victim with useful knowledge, and had access to their research. I dug into artifact refining specifically to analyze alien engineering, and I mined my own world's lore, most of it out of Kenshin's notes. Funding was trivial. Cosmetics money, plus Goro handing me whatever I asked for to keep me interested. Staff was the problem. Ayame and Ryuji were committed to medicine and would have had to start artifact theory from zero. And Root is very good at arson and conspiracy, and expecting scientific research out of them is like expecting pigs to climb trees. In the version of history I remembered, that organization sat on piles of Sharingan and Jiro cells for 40 years and produced a few transplanted eyes and 1 successful subject, and that one was mine. There's a structural reason. Ninja trained to fight, so scientific literacy among them is a birth defect, and the civilians who have it can't use chakra. So I ran the whole thing on shadow clones and made a decision I want you to note. The moment impure world reincarnation worked, the first person I was going to bring back was Kenshin Saito, an immortal, indestructible, tireless body containing the greatest research mind my world has ever produced, working 24 hours a day, the most perfect scientific workhorse imaginable. Somewhere in there, incidentally, Kyozo and I became local celebrities, and since we were both commoner orphans, both the Kenji and the Hyuga sent quiet feelers about how excellent their daughters were and how nice it would be to have a son-in-law. I declined everything on the grounds of ninjutsu research. Kyozo complained about this in public, loudly, asking why no young ladies came looking for him, and Ayame put him in the hospital for a week. After which, she started dragging me there to argue about medical problems, and between the two of us arguing, we accidentally invented several techniques that are still in use. A year and an unreasonable number of failures later, the machine worked, and it confirmed the hypothesis exactly. Chakra records a person's complete physiological information and fragments of their soul, which is precisely why a shadow clone comes out physical, independent, and fully capable of thinking, and why nobody in my world had ever found that strange. The device reads that information out, filters it, and feeds it into a user's senses so that he lives another person's memories, and it had a side effect far worse than the version in Arthur's world. The bleeding effect. Mild cases get disorientation and temporary confusion about who they are. Severe cases lose themselves in someone else's life and do not come back, which meant only I could use it because I had 5 other versions of myself to synchronize with every night, and the anchor held. So I read enormously. I lived through the combat experience of dead men, and my understanding and proficiency in ninjutsu went vertical. And at the end of it, by living inside other people's chakra, I learned how to activate and hold the chakra of someone who is not me, which was the last piece. The laboratory had a culture tank in it with a pale, hairless body floating in it like an unfinished sculpture. One of 6 clone prototypes grown from Jiro cells. 3 had gone to Goro so his people could attempt transplants, and I expected nothing from that because that man's talents are political. I had a shadow clone start the camera because I am not an idiot and because I knew this was going to be historic. Then I took a talisman sealed jar out of cold storage. Inside it was a small piece of dark red flesh, the second Hokage's. Finally, it's about to begin. Seals. Impure world reincarnation. The air in the room went thick, and something got dragged across a boundary it had no business crossing. The tissue lit up. Glittering dust rushed in like iron filings to a magnet, and underneath it the body reshaped, skin taking on life, bone adjusting, the blurred face sharpening, silver-white hair standing up like a brush. The dust cleared on a man in deep blue Sengoku-era armor wearing a Konoha protector. I laughed out loud, quietly, because chakra is an unfathomable black box and it had just done all of that for me on request. His eyes opened. He came off the table in one motion, landed with his guard already up, and swept the room with the gaze of a bird of prey. It stopped on a teenager with an expression far too old for his face. Then it found the metal plate on my forehead and dropped about 10%. Where am I? His voice had not been used in decades. Then he looked at his own hands. This feeling, is this impure world reincarnation? What year is it? Is Konoha still standing? It is the 25th year of Konoha. I am Takeshi Koga's student, Hisoka. His pupils shrank because he had done the arithmetic instantly. Not much time had passed since his death, and the technique was already this refined. When he died, it was barely theoretical, and even a successful summon could not have kept this much of the subject's mind or power intact. So this jutsu, you completed it. That's right, although it's only barely usable. Which was true, and which deepened the shock and then turned into something more complicated. Admiration, assessment, and a kind of relief that I did not expect and did not understand until much later. Because he had spent his life inventing techniques, and he knew exactly how rare a research-minded ninja is, and he had just found one among his grand students who had picked up his unfinished work and finished it. Truly, he said, a formidable younger generation. Then, urgently, Kenji Ryosuke, is that man still alive? Uncertain, I said. However, the probability is high. When you cannot confirm an enemy is dead, assuming the worst and preparing on that basis is the safest approach, isn't it, Lord Second? I could hardly tell him that Ryosuke was, at that moment, sitting in a cave attached to a statue, waiting for his pawns to ripen. He nodded and told me why he'd never believed it either. Ryosuke had gone to the Valley of the End to die, which made no sense for that man. He had deliberately bitten a piece out of his brother, and then the corpse had gone missing. The whole thing stank of a conspiracy he had never been able to prove, which is exactly why he had built this technique and studied his brother's cells in the first place. So, why go to such lengths to summon me, to perfect the jutsu? That's one aspect. What I need more is your mind, which is unmatched in the ninja world. He joined the project. Nobody knew. Exposure would have caused a genuinely catastrophic amount of trouble, and with a research titan on the staff, everything accelerated, because my knowledge is imported, and Kenshin Saito, alone, from nothing, invented spatial teleportation and the shadow clone and a technique that talks to the afterlife, and his grasp of how to develop a technique was far past mine. The collision went both ways. He kept saying, this approach, it's genius, at my systematic theoretical frameworks, which were normal in another universe, and revolutionary in his. After we solved a stability problem that had blocked him for 2 decades, he asked me seriously, Hisoka, how on earth did your brain develop like that? Probably I just let my mind wander a lot. Then we hit the wall. Sharingan transplanted into the clones and fed on Jiro cells showed much higher activity than normal eyes, and nothing else. No evolution, not one stage, not even a single tomo. Strange, said Kenshin. Too strange. His hypothesis had been that the Sharingan awakens under enormous emotional stress and leans toward one half of the chakra spectrum, and that his brother's cells carry the other half at an absurd concentration, and that combining them should produce something. The data said he was wrong, which left the question, then why did Ryosuke bite him? I was more confused than he was, because I knew, from a story I had read in another life, that Ryosuke transplanted that flesh, and his eyes evolved into something entirely new, and that this is not in dispute. My model was botanical. Both of those eyes trace back to the same tree, and to grow powerful fruit you need roots and branches strong enough to feed it, which is why a man with one ordinary transplanted Sharingan is half dead after using it once, and a man with a certain clan's physiology can hold the power of a statue that eats gods, but the reaction simply wasn't happening. Is it possible, I said, that Jiro and Ryosuke were themselves special? And Kenshin thought about it honestly, which is the thing I respected most about him. Early on, he said, the gap between himself and his brother was not large, and neither was the gap between Ryosuke and his own younger brother. The turning point came after he personally killed Akio, and Ryosuke took his brother's eyes and surged ahead, and then, impossibly, Jiro kept pace with him, and then began to pull past, after which both of them left the category of ninja entirely. But genetically, he said, the difference between my cells and my brother's is not significant. He had checked. Secretly, years ago. Same clan, same bloodline, no decisive difference. He had filed it under talent, the way you file anything you cannot measure. What if the difference isn't in the cells at all, I said. What if it's in the chakra? He objected from consensus. Chakra is body energy plus spiritual energy. Same cells, same bloodline, same output. Isn't impure world reincarnation the counterexample you built yourself? He stopped, because that technique proves two things at once. Chakra can exist independently of a living body, and it stores enough information about a life to rebuild a stranger's body into the original owner's shape with the original owner's bloodline in a vessel that never had it, which puts chakra above genetics. He got there in about 4 seconds and his mouth went dry. You're suggesting that my brother's development and Ryosuke's was caused by some external chakra influence. And if chakra can shape a body, then steeping a growing embryo in someone's chakra long enough could grow the next version of a specific person, which raises the question of whose and when. He was certain no technique had ever been performed on Jiro, and he was equally certain that no ninja in recorded history had enough power to shape 2 future monsters with his own chakra, possibly not even the Sage of Six Paths. And then he stopped talking, because the Hayashi clan has scattered ancient records claiming a connection to that man, which he had dismissed his entire life as ancestral vanity, since any bloodline is diluted to nothing across that many centuries. But if chakra does not dissipate at death, and if chakra can be called back through flesh as a medium, then can chakra in the Pure Land reach forward through a bloodline and touch its descendants? He laid the whole conjecture out, finding it more absurd the more he said it, and more plausible the longer he held it. And I was genuinely startled, because from a handful of scraps the man had walked to within arm's reach of a truth I had read in a comic book. And I realized I should have seen it earlier myself. In my world, the key is not blood, and it is not DNA. Impure world reincarnation is the proof, because summoning a bloodline user into a vessel that has no bloodline works perfectly. Chakra sits above genetics, everything else is downstream. Next, I said, it's time for verification. While I was doing that, I went fishing for a soul. I was at university by then, in that world, 11 years old, double majoring in mathematics and physics. Physics because I intended to finish my previous life's reactor work and turn results into resources. Mathematics for a reason I will state with no embarrassment. It pays out fastest. Physics needs facilities. Mathematics needs paper, a pen, and a sufficient brain, so imported theory from a more advanced world can simply be thrown onto a desk and become an astonishing achievement. But first, the experiment. I had spent a year harvesting faith by a method so crude that the other versions of me laughed at it. I planted divine machine cores in every temple, memorial hall, and tourist site in the country associated with my ancestor, and left them there absorbing the admiration of everyone who walked past. I had also, deliberately, spent that year manufacturing news and showing my face. Not vanity. I was editing where my own name sits in the collective subconscious of a nation. Because I had established the rule by then. Inner vision prices a request and prices the punishment according to whether the request matches your public identity. Are you qualified to know this? Is it reasonable that you would? An unknown student asking for launch codes has a success probability of 0 and a backlash that leaves no remains. The man in the top office asking the same question pays almost nothing because, of course, he would know. So I hammered 2 labels into place and then kept proving them with results nobody could argue with. Descendant of the woohoo lineage. Once in a millennium genius. Until enough people agreed, without ever thinking about it, that of course that boy would know his ancestors' secrets. At which point the resistance quietly went away. I sealed the room with a family formation that isolates it completely, no energy in, none out, and it cost me enough that raising it put sweat on my forehead. I checked it 3 times. Then I went in with a fist-sized mass of faith in my hand, which was simultaneously his navigation beacon and his grappling hook. My mature model of the place by then was this. If the world's rules are a cloud with infinite capacity, then inner vision is a practitioner using his own energy as an access key to spin up a private virtual machine inside it, and all the fortune-telling in his country's history is people running database queries under extremely strict permissions. What he was about to do was not a query. It was a download. I activated the faith and the mass came alive and expanded, and it did not expand deeper into the gray. It went straight up and pierced the boundary. My eyebrows went up because I had never seen that, and because it meant every part of my reasoning had been right. I took hold of the thing that had gone through and pulled, and what came back down the channel was not a memory. It was the summed perception of thousands of years. Every reader, every playgoer, every soldier, every child, every rival, every slanderer, all the imagination and worship and fear that humanity has ever attached to the symbol Chen Long, arriving in a single instant. It was an explosion happening inside my own skull. An ordinary mind would have come apart in a 10,000th of a second and left a body that breathed. I held, because I had 5 other versions of myself telling me who I was, and I hauled the line back in inch by inch with something on the end of it. And then, faint and unmistakable, somewhere under my own consciousness, a snap. The faith chain broke. I opened my eyes in the real world, coughed blood onto the floor of my own meditation room, went white, and started smiling like a lunatic. Because floating in the air inside a formation that seals all energy exchange, where nothing had been a minute ago, was a mass of energy the size of an infant's fist. Loose energy dissipates the instant it leaves its owner. This was holding its own shape. The next day I loaded it into the machine. My version of the memory reader, built off Arthur's principles, whose function is to decode the information carried inside energy and render it as something you can watch. Head-mounted display, 3 checks, start, darkness, then light. And the first thing he saw was a refined middle-aged man in a silk headscarf with a feather fan, adjusting his robes in a bronze mirror, who looked exactly like the actor from the 1986 television adaptation. Could it be, I said out loud inside my own experiment, that the ancestral energy I nearly killed myself retrieving contains TV drama clips? It got worse. The 3 visitors at the thatched cottage were the screen versions. The famous strategy conversation matched my memory of the show down to the micro-expressions. Then it turned. At Boang Slope, a red-faced general with a great blade cut through an army 7 times over, and I sat there in a headset thinking, he has turned this into a video game. And on the wall, Qianlong formed hand seals and chanted, and the fire on that battlefield roared several times higher as if somebody had emptied oil on it. Sorcery. Actual sorcery, not a fire stratagem. Then the memory fragmented and jumped, and he was at Red Cliffs, on a 7-star altar, in Taoist robes with a peachwood sword, walking the steps of the Big Dipper and genuinely calling the east wind, which is definitely not in the television series, and I worked out what I had actually caught, not my ancestors' memory. An aggregate in which 2,000 years of collective perception had grown into and largely overwritten whatever the real memories were, which is exactly why everybody in it wore an actor's face. I had assumed the man reached a state where his spirit was a sealed and complete world that outside influence could not touch, which is the only reason I dared attempt the salvage, apparently not. And then the last memory, Wuzhong Plains, autumn wind, a guttering oil lamp, a wasted man on a sickbed who knows exactly how much time he has, with the dynasty unrestored and the campaign unfinished, forcing himself upright to set out 7 lamps and ask heaven for a few more years. And in the lamplight the dying face changed. The brows, the nose, the mouth, becoming 7 or 8 parts identical to my own, only far older and worn out. My mind stopped, and then a dam went, bleed through. The thing I knew intimately, because in another universe I was the man strapped into that machine. After deep immersion in an ancestor's memory, cognition, and even physiology synchronize, and you stop watching and start remembering. But why only here? Why this segment? And as I asked it, the dying man rose to set the lamps, and the whole thing poured into me. My family's ultimate art turns out to be a fire. Samadhi true fire is not a fire technique. It is the union of a person's 3 treasures, essence, energy, and spirit, condensed and sublimated into a flame. It is the fundamental fire of a life and the ultimate expression of being alive, and the stronger the 3 treasures, the fiercer it burns. And conversely, if you can keep that fire burning fiercely, that life does not run out. The 7 lamps make the caster himself into an altar, a formation that drags ambient energy in from the outside world and pours it into his own life fire, adding oil to a lamp that is going out. As long as there is enough firewood, the fire keeps burning. Simple, crude, true only in theory, since in that country's entire recorded history, the number of people who managed it can be counted on one hand. But my ancestor was the greatest sorcerer of his age, and sorcery borrows the world's own rules. In the old legends, the Big Dipper governs death, and the Southern Dipper governs life, and the stars hold authority over how long a man gets. So he intended to lever that authority open using the belief of an entire civilization and finish the work in one step, and that is exactly where the trap closed. Because borrowing the rules means accepting the rules, and the criterion is whether what you are asking for matches who the world thinks you are. And however close to a demon Qianlong's wisdom was, in the perception of the people of his time, he could never be an immortal. The ritual was an act against heaven, and it failed as a matter of arithmetic. And here is the part that took the top of my head off. With that man's cultivation, he knew forcing it was certain death. And he set the lamps out anyway and looked at them with an old man's eyes full of refusal, as if trying to pour his entire life into the wicks, which is why this one memory came through intact after 2,000 years of distortion. It was the deepest thing in him, an unwillingness so total and so pure that an ocean of other people's imagination could not sand it off. That part was actually him. All the rest of it was us. And then my body jerked. Because in a world where energy ties spirit to flesh that tightly, synchronizing with that memory set my own energy circulating by itself along exactly the path the ritual used, spirit above, energy in the middle, essence below, all of it converging, and with a low sound, like a struck bell, an azure flame appeared inside me. I had learned my family's ultimate inheritance by accident, in a headset, from a dead man, and it did not stop. The ambient energy in the sealed room began pouring into it. Next door, my father was dozing under a locust tree with a fan on his chest, and opened his eyes. The whole village is one enormous formation. The layout of the streets, the placement of the rocks and the trees, all of it, built by the family centuries ago, self-renewing, protecting the line. And that formation, which normally runs like clockwork, had gone chaotic because energy was being plundered toward one point at a horrifying rate, like a hole in the bottom of a lake. He looked at the convergence and his pupils shrank because it was his son's meditation room. The memory ended where it had to end, stars falling with the autumn wind, those unwilling eyes, and a lamp going out. Heaven's judgment is not something a man reverses, and a strategist that close to divine died in regret anyway. I sat there a long time. This world, I said out loud to an empty room, is genuinely dangerous to play with like this. Then I opened my right hand, and an azure flame lit silently in my palm. I had it. The technique the entire sect had wanted for 1,000 years, acquired the way you acquire swimming or riding a bicycle. Because I had not studied it, I had done it, first person, once, and the body does not forget. And when I willed it, the flame rose, and the room's energy came to it, which is not what the family texts describe. The family texts teach you how to light the life fire and then list a few sensible uses, burning intangible things, cleaning out your own inner demons. My version does something else, and I found the precedent in a novel that everybody in that country has read. There is a chapter where a monkey eats the peaches, drinks the wine, and swallows the elixirs, and then uses this exact fire to refine all of it into one body and comes out indestructible. I now have that. I absorb ambient energy and refine it directly into my own essence, energy, and spirit. And most absurdly, without doing anything. As long as the fire is lit inside me, it refines and absorbs on its own. Idle cultivation, 24 hours a day, at a lower rate than deliberate practice and with no upper limit on duration. The irony I enjoyed most. This was my own ancestors' peerless method, worked out with inner vision's help, and lost to the world precisely because using it triggered the world's balancing mechanism. And because I took it out of a salvaged memory instead of asking the system for it, I bypassed the punishment entirely. I stole from the thief. Then the door banged open. Chinger, what on earth is going on? My father found me standing there, unharmed, with a cluster of azure fire in my palm. Froze, rubbed his eyes, asked himself why that fire looked so much like the family's ultimate art, and then went straight from horror to ecstasy, crossed the room, and grabbed me by both shoulders with his face red and his voice shaking. Good boy, you really are my son, at this age, the legendary Samadhi true fire. Ancestors above. I quietly swallowed the entire scientific explanation I had prepared, since I used an exploit and copied the skill off our ancestor is a difficult opening. Father, aren't you curious how I learned it? Curious about what? If I asked, would you tell me honestly? He waved a hand. Besides, my son came first in the national examination at 10. That's probably not simpler than lighting Samadhi true fire. What is there to be surprised about? The uncles and aunts who came running got the same logic and dispersed, saying things like, well, that's a lie for you, unlike my useless kid. I scratched my head and made a note that the genius persona I had spent years constructing was now working slightly too well. That night I came into the fog to tell the rest of me about the fire, and stopped, because there were 4 new figures standing in it. No, 3 people, and a rock. The introductions synchronized themselves, and I want to give you these in order because the pattern by now was undeniable. 1. Ren Saito. In a story a great many people in that world have played, I build a video game that traps 10,000 human beings inside it and kills them when they die. Currently, I was a university student in a lab coat 2 sizes too big, with absolutely no intention of building any such thing. 2. Another Wang Hao, middle-aged, weathered, a lab coat, and a tiredness I was hiding badly. I had thought I landed in an ordinary period piece and used my previous life's knowledge to become a master of that industry and got so good at it that a mysterious organization invited me, in the way organizations like that invite people, to come and build a compact energy reactor, reportedly as the power core for a next generation of monsters. 3. Hiroshi Yamada, university student, brand new. I had been dreaming every night of ruined cities and things coming out of the seabed, and I worked out where I was from the name of the current Secretary General. I looked around and exchanged a glance with the rest of me, because the intake criteria of this space had a very obvious bias. Then the EVA one poked the last item with his foot. These 3 are more or less normal. This lump isn't one of us too, is it? He touched the rock and recoiled like he'd been electrocuted. Holy, it's Cars? I said reasonably that I did not know who that was and asked if he was related to Shiro. My oldest self lit up. Xylos? From JoJo? He touched it and confirmed it. That version of me had transmigrated directly into the ultimate life form at the precise moment that being had given up thinking in orbit and had been pulled into our fog while my mind was in the process of shutting down. My luck, we agreed, was unparalleled. The Kamen Rider one patted the rock with open pleasure, having decided that being abducted to build monsters was, comparatively, quite good. The stone trembled and shed a few chips in silent protest. It confirms it, said the EVA one. The space selects by need. And it did. Every time. In Kaido's world, I had just acquired a damaged specimen of a creature that absorbs other organisms, and had been wondering how to push it further, and here arrived a perfect being who controls his own cells absolutely, and can become any living thing on Earth. In James's world, I was building armor out of fused genetics, and considered a stone that fuses anything to be a gift. And in the other world, I needed mathematics past that world's level, which a computer scientist and a man from a world with alien technology could both supply. So we split into groups, and the biology group gathered around the rock, whose research topic was, naturally, how to get me back to Earth. Because research requires equipment, I solved it in about 4 months, in vacuum, with no hands. My problem had never been toughness. I owned the abilities of every organism on that planet, and every one of them had evolved for that planet. I could go without food or water and ignore cold, and I could not breathe vacuum or shrug off cosmic radiation, which is precisely why I had chosen to stop thinking and become a stubborn rock waiting for a chance that was never coming. What I had now was a catalog of organisms that were never evolved at all, designed from scratch as weapons. So I built, in order, organs that absorb sunlight and convert it directly, and then biological thrusters that turn that energy into thrust. The return orbit was computed for me on a corporation supercomputer in a different universe. The rock cracked and flaked away into the dark, and underneath it was not flesh. It was crystal. Countless small prisms, drinking the sun. And then a streak of light crossed the silence toward a blue planet. I landed in Cairo. There was, at that moment, a young man on a rooftop with an emerald construct standing behind him who had just laid a net of glowing threads between every building on the block, and who had just shouted the name of his attack at a golden-haired figure standing in the middle of it, and a burning object came out of the sky with a tail of flame aimed at that exact spot. Vorlag's body moved before his mind did, and he abandoned a certain kill to get out of the way. The meteor punched through the roof he had been standing on. Out of the crater came a man built like a statue with purple hair down his back, and Vorlag licked his lips because his instincts were telling him that this thing was carrying an unimaginable quantity of life energy and would be the finest meal he had ever had. That was me, and on the roof, an old man went white to the lips. Because Jonathan Ryder had beaten that being, once, 50 years earlier, with everything he had and a great deal of luck. "Hey, Vorlag!" he shouted down. "Temporary truce. Let's deal with this guy first." His companion nearly fell off the building. Vorlag looked between them and smiled. "That proposal sounds good, but I refuse." Then he stopped time and beat every theoretical vital point I had into paste inside a few frozen seconds, and let time start again, and watched my body go through a wall like a dropped coat. He was very pleased. He remarked that an enemy this feared had crumpled like a plastic bag, and the old man on the roof screamed a warning at the man he had crossed the world to kill. "Vorlag, that guy isn't dead, because to an ultimate life form, that isn't a serious injury." Vorlag frowned at the panic and then noticed a faint buzzing. A few unremarkable flies had appeared from somewhere and were settling on his neck and his arms. In Egypt, flies are normal. They were not flies. An ultimate life form that can become any organism on the planet does not need to survive being beaten to paste. I only needed to not be all in one place when it happened. I ate him. There is no gentler way to describe it, and I have stopped looking for one. And afterward, there was an extremely awkward negotiation on a rooftop in Cairo between a very old man who had spent 50 years being certain that thing was gone forever, and a being who wanted, specifically, 2 things: a legal identity and starting capital. Because you cannot do research without equipment, and you cannot buy equipment without a passport. I want to note, because it is the funniest thing in this entire account, that the ultimate life form of that world spent the following decade as a well-funded biology investor, and that the ultimate life form was me. Around the same time, in the world where I was 11, I published a paper. I had chosen mathematics for 2 reasons, and the second one is the interesting one. Proofs need no apparatus, obviously, but also, physical law differs subtly between worlds, so imported physics needs verification I could not yet perform, while mathematics is a neutral language. A circle's circumference is the same in every universe any of us could reach. A soundproof transfers intact. So, I took a monster that world's mathematicians had been failing to kill for 40 years and I transcribed the answer, not solved. Transcribed, then adapted, then rephrased into terms those professionals would accept. I checked every logical step and uploaded it. Nobody expected anything from a paper signed by an unknown Chinese name, right up until professionals started reading it. Impossible. It was actually proven. This deduction is too perfect. It's art. Who is this? How old? Then 2 or 3 giants of the field said something in public, and inside a day the international mathematical community came apart. A century-old problem broken. A teenager shakes the world's mathematical landscape, and underneath the headlines, the byproduct. As my name spread through every country in that cultural sphere and bound itself ever more tightly to a man who has been half a god for 1800 years, and as people started using the phrase Marquis Wu reborn, an invisible pressure began converging on me from every direction at once, and at a critical point the air hummed, and the formless faith churned and condensed and took an outline. A figure in ancient robes and a scholar's cap, holding a feather fan, standing quietly behind me, not solid, not exactly there, radiating the specific composure of a man who wins battles from 1,000 miles away, a divine spirit born out of what 100 million people believe. I tested it immediately because of course I did. The legend attached to that name involves foresight, wind and rain, formations, and above all fire, red cliffs, Boang Slope, an entire culture's deep, unshakable impression that this man's answer to a problem is to set it alight. So I flicked up a small flame, and the phantom behind me moved its fan, and the flame swelled, its color going purer and deeper, several times hotter than it had any right to be. Then I raised a small vortex of wind, and the fan moved again, and a gentle swirl turned into something with an edge on it, full of tiny blades making a sound like a sword being drawn. Borrowing the east wind, I thought. My formations gained range, power, and calculation speed, for free, because enough people believed my ancestor was good at them. I wrote down that if the trend held, the thing behind me would keep growing. And now I have to bring you back to my own world, because this is where it all comes due. Underground in Konoha, I was reading Kenshin's overnight reports, and having top-tier research talent working 24 hours a day without pay was proving extremely useful. We had established the year before that chakra sits above the cells and turned the whole program around on that axis. And by then, I had most of the answer. Everything points at the God Tree. It is an energy converter. It absorbs this planet's raw natural energy continuously and refines it by a process I still cannot describe into fruit containing enormous quantities of chakra. And then the Sage of Six Paths, after sealing his mother, sowed chakra into human beings like seeds, which is how ninja happened. Which means those seeds rebuilt human physiology so that a person, like the tree, converts the planet's raw energy into a finished, pre-optimized, easily manipulated product, which is exactly why ninja perform miracles so casually. We are not more gifted than a cultivator in my other world. We were handed the processed version. It also explains why the people of my world are built differently from the people of every other world I have access to. Our entire circulation runs on the chakra system. We have no middle or upper energy centers at all, because there was no need for them. And per things I pried out of the White Snake Sage, in the deep past there were humans here who communed with nature directly and borrowed heaven and earth's power in a completely different system before all this. So the conclusion is not comfortable, and I wrote it down anyway. The Sage of Six Paths modified humanity into an extension of the God Tree, a human-shaped port. We gained the use of chakra, and we lost the possibility of growing past it. Which is why, without sage mode or a forbidden art that breaks the body's governor, a ninja's ceiling in this world is essentially fixed at birth. I have thought a great deal since about why he chose that, and I do not have an answer I like. And I had a manpower problem, which was that this era trains people to fight, so research ninja do not exist, and even medics are scarce. To get more research partners, the short-sighted men who allocate resources had to be made to feel that research produces a kind of power that destruction cannot reach, which is why there was a cannon standing in the corner of my laboratory, built on the artifact refining principles of another universe, and much simpler than the originals there. Raw energy in my other world needs insanely complex circuitry to shape. Chakra arrives pre-processed. A divine machine here does not need to teach the energy manners. It only needs to know what shape to put it in. Kenshin and I had spent 4 months on it. I demonstrated it in Root's underground laboratory, with Takeshi standing next to Goro and saying nothing. In an atmosphere you could have cut into slices. I made 2 adjustments and pressed a red button. Light flooded the muzzle. The chakra gathering in front of it visibly twisted the air, and then a beam took a bottomless crater out of a reinforced rock wall and left the edges molten. Takeshi's pupils shrank because that was comparable to large-scale ninjutsu, and large-scale ninjutsu requires an elite jonin, hand seals, preparation, and a large fraction of a man's life force. And I had pressed a button. I detached the core and held it up. A rune-covered metal cylinder. A chakra capacitor, special conductive alloy plus sealing formulae. Its function is storing chakra. This standard model holds the entire reserve of a fully grown Jonin. A device inside the cannon excites it, performs the nature and form transformation, and releases the result. What you just saw was one capacitor discharged as raw force, no technique at all. Takeshi's mouth had gone dry. Are you saying you could use a device like that to perform any ninjutsu? Because if a machine can do nature and form transformation, then the exquisite manual control that defines a ninja stops being the point of a ninja. Theoretically, yes, provided I understand the technique's principle, which I did not say, and Goro could not contain himself. He actually stepped forward. Can it be mass-produced? Because with 100 of those, flattening the ninja world stops being a fantasy and becomes a procurement schedule. Yes, given a sufficient supply of the conductive ore. Good, good, as expected of the man I chose. He clapped my shoulder. Goro! Takeshi's voice came out flat and hard. Hisoka is my student, and Konoha cannot afford another large-scale war. A woman's opinion. And then they had the argument in front of me, which I had wanted because I needed to hear it. Goro's case was not stupid. Without Jiro, the war is coming anyway. Konoha holds the most fertile land and has lost the man who deterred nine-tailed beasts, and the only reason it has not blown up already is that the other village's new generation is not finished cooking. And thanks to a cosmetic and a tournament, Konoha is now rolling in money. With that much money, should we not expand the military, or should we let it rot? Takeshi's case was also not stupid. Overwhelming strength invites everyone to combine against you, and the worst outcome is facing 4 great nations at once. Which is precisely why we strike first, gather our strength, and annihilate their active forces with the speed of lightning before they can react, once and for all. Then they both turned and asked me what I thought. My lords, I said, the greatest value of this technology is not war, it is that it lets ordinary people use ninjutsu. Both of them stopped. And only then did they go back through the last 5 minutes and notice the detail they had both looked straight past. I had formed no seals. I had spent none of my own chakra. I pressed a button. Let me put the implication plainly, the way I put it to them. This is called a ninja world, and there are almost no ninja in it. The entire order, nations on top, villages beside them, everyone else underneath, exists because a tiny fraction of the population holds chakra and therefore holds military power. 5 great nations depend on their villages. The villages depend on everyone else for missions and food. If an unarmed civilian can level a hillside, none of that survives. Takeshi and Goro looked at each other, and for once the two of them were having exactly the same thought. Takeshi did not sleep for several days after that. Goro's head was full of conquest, and Takeshi could see the military value perfectly well, and could also see one step further, which is the difference between them. Then he adopted one of my proposals, which was to tell the Fear Daimyo, because villages exist under the patronage of countries and a change this size cannot go around him. Hisoka. Prepare yourself, you're coming with me. I had never seen the capital. Wide streets, mixed architecture that should not have worked and somehow did, rows of streetlights, and in the distance, a tram. Interesting, I thought. This world's productivity is higher than I assumed, roughly the early 19th century of my previous life, which means there is a preliminary industrial base to build on, and it means the televisions and computers that show up decades from now stop being absurd, and it means I do not have to start from stone. The daimyo was a heavy graying old man in expensive clothes with a genuinely warm smile, who stood up to greet Takeshi and then looked me over. So this is the famous Hisoka, young and promising. By then, the 3 of us had started being called something in the newspapers, which I found embarrassing and Kyozo found delightful. Then the daimyo got to it. Takeshi looked at the guards. The old man raised an eyebrow, so confidential that even his own bodyguards cannot hear it, and waved them out. His guard captain hesitated. That's enough. If Takeshi meant me harm, 100 more of you wouldn't help. Alone. Hisoka, show His Excellency the thing. I unsealed a metal gauntlet, intricately worked, giving off a faint pulse. And instead of explaining it, I walked over and fitted it onto the ruler of the country's right arm myself. I call this the ninjutsu emitter. Wear it, press the stud on the side, and an ordinary person who has never trained can use ninjutsu. Is that true or false? I pointed at the stud. He pressed it, and a fist of orange fire burned above his palm. Small and entirely real. Is this actually ninjutsu? I mentioned helpfully that the other button changes the mode and the knob at the back adjusts the output, and then the ruler of the land of fire turned into a 9-year-old with a new toy, a jet of clean water across his own reception room, then arcs of lightning crackling between his fingers. Fire, water, lightning. A man who had spent his entire life on the other side of a wall from all of this, holding it in his hand. And then the ruler came back, all at once. What is its energy source? because he knows perfectly well that techniques burn chakra and that ordinary people have chakra they can neither feel nor use. The capacitor inside the gauntlet. Capacitor. So it must be charged. He had the crux in 4 seconds, which is why he had the job. Yes. Charging speed depends on the ninja doing the charging, capacity depends on material and volume, and the gauntlet is the smallest model, about 1 genin's worth. He deflated visibly. Ninja are rare and expensive, and nobody is going to spend a career filling batteries. However, I said, Konoha happens to possess an inexhaustible source of chakra, and I looked at Takeshi. Takeshi's heart audibly skipped. The daimyo stopped breathing for a moment. There was a very long silence in that room. So, he said, finally, low and steady. What is it you want the Land of Fire to do about this? Which was the sentence I had come for. 3 things. More research-oriented ninja, who need no combat ability at all, but need broad knowledge and fine control. Factories, because Konoha is a village and has no industrial base, and the Land of Fire does. And money. He snorted and tapped the table. Boy, you have a considerable appetite. I cannot agree to the first one. And I named his fear before he could because it is the correct fear. Great nations and ninja villages are a marriage of interest, not of hearts. The nation needs the deterrent and is afraid of the deterrent. Ninja produce nothing, they live on commissions. And when the missions can no longer feed the population, men with extraordinary power turn to other means. With small numbers, a daimyo can balance that by controlling the money and setting villages against each other. A surge breaks the mechanism. Since you know, he said, why do you dare say it? Because all of those contradictions, in the end, are contradictions between productive forces and production relations. I put a few plain seeds on the tatami. What if chakra is not only good for destruction? I changed the wristband and pulsed it. The seeds rooted, sprouted, climbed. And in the time it takes to breathe 4 times, there was a clump of heavy golden mature rice standing on the mat, ears full, and the room smelled like a harvest. Takeshi stared at it because the only thing in recorded history that grows plants like that belonged to one man, and said absolutely nothing because you do not undercut your own student in front of the ruler of your country. He worked out afterward that it was a single attribute transformation drawing would release chakra straight out of a certain kind of cell, and he made me explain it twice. The daimyo came out of his chair because he knew exactly what he was looking at, and it was not a plant. It was food, without limit. Food supports population. Population is the base of everything a country is. I kept going while it was hot. Earth release for leveling ground, canals, roads, bridges, mining, at efficiency past any machine on this planet. Wind release for flight, for direct conversion into motion as a clean energy source. Is there any power in this world more versatile than chakra? He swallowed audibly. He had thought about it, obviously. Every ruler has, and it had always died on the same rock. Ordinary people cannot guide chakra, and ninja are scarce, expensive, and prone to dying. Then the ruler's caution came back because he was good at his job. Popularizing this, even only for production, alarms every other country. They will copy it or they will try to stop it, and that risks a war between great nations rather than a squabble between villages. And Takeshi, whose timing that day was perfect, proposed a pilot, 1 designated area, limited resources, measure the effects and the risks, then extend, verification, and a buffer. The daimyo relaxed all at once. That can certainly be tried. And then, in tremendous spirits, good, let us eat. Over the meal, I gave him one more thing, which had nothing to do with chakra. The Land of Fire should issue its own currency, and when trading with resource-poor neighbors, require settlement in it, because the essence of money is trust, and once other countries are holding yours, they will defend your position in order to defend their own savings. I did not tell him where I learned that. He did not ask. His eyes lit up, and he said that this boy was not only a research genius, but a statesman. And then, immediately, Hisoka-kun, are you married? Several of my daughters are a little older than you, but their appearance and character are quite acceptable. Takeshi nearly inhaled his sake. I declined, firmly. I have no interest in a political marriage, and I had, at that point, no interest in any other kind either. The deal. The Land of Fire funds institutes and factories near the village, with supplies and technical staff. The research ninja request gets shelved pending the pilot, and one extra thing I asked for, which he granted without thinking about it, and which was worth more to me than the factories. Permission to tour the country's schools and official research facilities. What I found was a world with a badly deformed technology tree. Anatomy, biology, and immunology are freakishly advanced, nearly a century ahead of where they should be, because ninja are constantly injured and bloodline research demands it. Physics has systematic electrical engineering in daily civilian use, and I found a Royal Institute paper that had already demonstrated that electromagnetic waves travel at the speed of light. And chemistry is nowhere, no large-scale refining, no polymer synthesis, nothing. Which told me precisely which theories I was going to casually discover next, in what order, so that the acceleration would look like a trend instead of an intervention. And underneath all of it, there was one personal objective, which I had been building toward for 4 years. A legitimate, official, unarguable reason to study the chakra of the nine-tailed fox. Back in Konoha, Takeshi asked me flat out how the rice was possible, since wood release belonged to exactly one man. Some things are better seen than explained. Follow me. Through familiar streets to an entrance on the edge of the village that he had walked past several hundred times. Cold, damp air. A narrow stair going down further than he expected. He had known his student had small activities. He had not known about a facility this size. And behind the last door, under soft light, a tall figure with silver-white hair turned around. Takeshi took a step backward and his fingers started shaking. My lord, second Hokage, little monkey, you've gotten old too. That address in that tone from a man who has been dead for years. I watched my teacher's mind arrive at what I had done, in stages, and I watched him understand exactly what ground his student was standing on. Kenshin explained it flatly, that I had used what he left behind and finished the work. Then he walked him through the whole program. Why the cells? Why the emitter? Takeshi listened to all of it. This kind of human experimentation is too shocking and too inhumane. Moreover, Lord Kenshin, I came to terms with life and death a long time ago. If my existence can produce some positive change in the village and in this world, then why not? And my teacher looked at the two of us with something that I can only describe as resentment, because his own master and his own student had teamed up behind his back, and the Hokage was the last man in the building to find out. Such talent is a double-edged sword, capable of creating unprecedented glory and unimaginable disaster. Then he gave his ruling, and he gave it heavily. The experiments continue, but every result is reported to me, no concealment. On one hand, this touches too many taboos, and I have to be certain it does not spiral, and on the other, and here his voice changed, I am more afraid that you will go astray because of your unparalleled talent. This disciple understands. And I want you to know that I told the third and not Goro on purpose. Because if Goro had learned I could raise the dead, he would have started a war the following week with an army that could not be killed. Then I went to see Akemi Morita. I laid it out honestly, which I had learned by then was the efficient approach with that woman, applying a tailed beast's power to the production and livelihood of an entire country, with the Hokage's authorization and the daimyo's. She was amused. Using the nine tails power for such things, that's the first time I have heard of it. Then she closed her eyes for a moment. However, it seems a little unwilling. Then do you mind if I speak to it? And I snapped my fingers, and the quiet old room became a dark dripping tunnel, ending at an enormous gate covered in seals, behind which something the size of weather was chained, with crimson eyes fixed on me. Akemi appeared beside me, and was genuinely impressed, because walking into another person's mind requires real mastery of illusion and a kind of transformation that almost nobody bothers with. I had built it out of methods from another world, and I had built it as a defense, because I do not enjoy the idea of someone doing this to me. The fox hit the end of its chains with a roar that shook the tunnel. I did not slow down, and my face did not change. Brat, you have some guts. But don't imagine you'll be using this great one for those boring little things. Use, I said. Why do you think everyone fears you? Naturally, because of this great one's unrivaled power. I don't think so. If it were only power, the first Hokage should have been the more terrifying existence. And the enormous body flinched at that name, and the pressure in the tunnel actually thinned. Then what do you say it is? It's the unknown. However powerful the first was, he was a human being and a ninja. His power and his behavior stayed inside what people could understand and predict. You are not that. Nobody knows where your power comes from, why you exist, what you want, or what you feel. Fear of what cannot be understood or controlled is an instinct. It isn't personal, it's arithmetic. The fox had no answer. Just because I'm not human, it was, I am fairly sure, the first time in several thousand years that anything had invited it to consider its own reputation from that angle, and Akemi, standing beside me, was moved, which I did not expect. Because as its Jinchuriki, she had half known for decades that the thing behind that gate was not the pure hatred the world believed, that it had moods, that it had a will, and she had known there was no point saying so because she would not have believed it either. And transforming the unknown into the known, I said, and eliminating the fear that comes from ignorance is precisely my job. I walked up to the gate and put out my hand. So come and help me. Byakko. The name detonated. The huge body shuddered. The crimson pupils shrank to points. because that name was used by exactly one person in the entire history of the world, and that person has been dead for a very long time, and this child should not have it. There was a silence in which I could hear it breathing, and then, to Akemi's complete astonishment, the enormous head slowly nodded. She asked me afterward what the name meant. I told her it was something I read once. The daimyo's resources started arriving, and the designated zone outside Konoha turned into a construction site with craftsmen and technicians shipping in from the capital, and Kenshin and I went straight into the fox's chakra. Because among all 9 of them, Byakko is the strangest, not only nearly the largest, but almost instinctively able to absorb and use natural energy, and since the tailed beasts are chakra masses split off the tree itself, that ability should be inherent to what they are, which was, at that point, the most interesting problem in my life. The 9 tails chakra is not merely an energy aggregate, I told Kenshin in front of a wall of charts. More accurately, it is a highly condensed chakra life form. Its joys and angers are directly reflected in the nature and output of what it produces. He found that genuinely impressive, because an ordinary ninja's chakra, once separated from him, carries inert biological data and is functionally interchangeable with anyone else's. The fox's carries a personal imprint. Its waveform when it is happy does not look like its waveform when it is angry. With a practical consequence, 2 different people's chakra will sit in the same capacitor without complaint. The fox's plus anyone's detonates. The reason I bothered to get along with it, incidentally, is that I had read the ending. A boy who leaks 4 tails of that chakra burns himself half to death. The same boy, after being given half of it, has no such problem. And after the 2 of them become friends, he can run the whole thing at a completely different power level with no cost at all. The only variable across all 3 cases is what the fox wants. It is called a mass of negative will. It was never going to smile at people who wanted to use it, so I did not. Kenshin's caveat was correct. Tailed beast chakra has a natural density advantage and is far harder to run precise transformations on. But that isn't impossible, is it? He laughed at me. We got to work. An impure world reincarnation body does not need to sleep, and I had learned by then to keep up. What to build first was easy, because the oldest rule of development in any world is that if you want to get rich, you build roads first. And here is the distinction that decides everything about applying this to infrastructure. Ninjutsu runs in 2 modes. The first is creation from nothing, burn your own chakra, and produce fire, water, lightning, earth, even gunpowder, which is how a man with no water source can drown an army. The advantage is any attribute, anywhere. The fatal flaw is that the substance dissipates the moment the chakra runs out, which makes it worthless for a bridge. The second is precise modification of matter that is already there. That is what a country is built out of. Months later, on a testing ground outside the village, with the daimyo's inspection team and my teacher standing at the front, I skipped the speech. An assistant brought out a much larger arm guard with several capacitors glowing red at the back. This is the terrain remodeler. It shapes the ground of a designated area by reading the user's intent and spending the capacitors. He aimed it at a broken rocky field. A low hum, and the ground for 50 meters squirmed, rose, sank, and rolled. Earth and stone moving in order, which is the part that made a man in expensive robes make a noise. And in a few minutes there was a wide flat roadbed where there had been rubble. One of the officials walked onto it and bounced on his heels twice. This is miraculous. This is a preliminary application. Then the researchers rolled out a wooden flying machine that lifted straight up on wind jets and stayed there, steered with levers. Then a piston engine running on fire release principles coughed, caught, and turned a shaft, and I watched a row of administrators understand transport, because the land of fire is enormous and its regions are cut off from each other by terrain and bad roads, and constant banditry had made large-scale road building effectively impossible for 200 years. And here was a way to net an entire country inside a decade, which is national control and economic development and military deployment, all in the same object. In the conference room afterward, they agreed to fund everything before I finished asking. Then I proposed the next step, nationwide screening of children with chakra aptitude, trained systematically for research and medicine, and the room went cold. An old official with a goatee said the obvious thing about too many ninja shaking the foundation of the state. So I pointed at the pyramid on the board. Over 80% of ninja are Jinin and Chunin, a handful reach Jonin. 1 in a million is a monster who can fight 10,000 men, and the level of a Jinin or a Chunin may not even beat ordinary troops carrying ninjutsu emitters, and what I wanted were not combat ninja at all. Specialists. Chakra manipulation talent, trained strictly within research and medicine, and taught nothing highly destructive. Takeshi added the guarantees, and he added them well. The training base sits outside Konoha. Curriculum and administration decided jointly by the country and the village, with Konoha supplying only teachers and security. We negotiated for real, for 2 hours, and settled. And out of it came something I had not asked for and immediately wanted, a Chakra Technology Development Bureau inside Konoha, coordinating every applied research program, with me as its first director. Days later, my teacher stood in his office holding the daimyo's personally signed procurement order and the bureau's startup funding, and his hand was shaking around a teacup, not because of the size of the number, because of where it came from. Not war, not assassination, not a mission with blood on it. Ninja, a profession that has meant killing for as long as the word has existed, had for the first time created that much value for a nation as builders. Months later, the barren land outside the village had factories on it in trial operation, and Takeshi briefed a hall full of ninja that the village would begin rotating personnel into them, classified at the highest level, as a crucial step in the transformation of the village and the country. The mission rewards will naturally not shortchange anyone. There was an immediate stir. The Hyuga kept their faces straight, and the corners of their mouths did not quite behave. A few Kenji sulked and were not stupid enough to say anything, and the smaller clans and the ordinary ninja could not hide it at all, because a month in a factory paid nearly what a B-rank mission paid, and a B-rank mission means leaving the village, sleeping in the dirt, and possibly meeting somebody better than you. This was not a mission. This was free money. Ryuji ran the training. He held up a palm-sized part covered in fine grooves and explained that the job was to engrave specific formulae onto marked positions, following the blueprint. "That's it?" said a Chunin, out loud, because each individual formula was trivial and tested only precision and patience, and if the Hokage had not announced it personally, he would have assumed it was a fraud. Ryuji pushed up his glasses and went slightly fanatical, the way he always did at this part. "Yes, it's that simple. This is a special technique invented by Hisoka-sama. Through modular design, techniques are broken into components and combined to perform different functions." A pause. "Of course, the precision requirement is absolute. There can be no deviation whatsoever." They swelled with confidence. Several of them actually bowed to me in the corridor and thanked me for the opportunity, and one asked me to please think of them next time. "Huh," I said. They were laughing then. They had not yet met the assembly line. Charging was handled by special collaborators, and to spare Akimi the travel, I built a capacitor tower at the core of the institute, several 100,000 small units in series, theoretically holding the total reserve of 300 jonin. Byakko snorted at the number and said it was nothing. 2-tailed beast bombs. And his chakra came in through Akimi until red light climbed the tower layer by layer and the whole structure hummed. The first field test was a river valley that needed a bridge, which under the old method meant conscripting labor for 8 months to a year. A few technicians with terrain remodelers worked together. The gauntlets hummed, the banks reinforced and shaped themselves. Huge stones settled into position as if set by an invisible hand. 3 days. The acceptance officials could not speak. The finance man ran an abacus on the spot and announced with some emotion that the saving against the cost of the devices was, in his professional opinion, an enormous profit. The daimyo's response was 2 sentences long, and both of them were, "Increase the investment." Orders came into Konoha like snow. 2 months later, nobody was smiling. "Why is this work getting more? I thought it was easy. Now it's more tiring than an A rank. But the pay is generous. Hold on. Next month's mortgage depends on it." And Byakko was thrashing inside the seal. Damn Hisoka, that bastard Hisoka, because at first it was 1 tower every few days, which was tolerable. And now it was several towers every 2 or 3 days, and through Akimi he could feel more capacitors arriving and more coming off the line behind those. Forever. The mighty 9-tailed fox, he complained to the inside of a woman's soul, reduced to an oversized power bank. If he had known, he said, he would never have nodded. The other 4 villages found out, obviously. The third Kazakage read the report twice. Using ninjutsu to build roads, several main roads at once, at that speed? His agents confirmed the roads were flat as if measured with a ruler and mentioned a very fast new mode of transport. He slammed the table because it was absurd. Large-scale ninjutsu can move terrain, his own does, but a ninja of that grade is a treasure in any village, and using one as a road laborer is insane. And several projects at once? They are people, not tailed beasts. Where do they get so much chakra? Fudo had the same reaction, so did Cloud, so did Mist. All 4 ordered their elites to find out at any cost. And the acquisition turned out to be humiliatingly easy because our construction sites had essentially no security, a few Chunin keeping civilians back, so 4 separate teams simply borrowed several terrain remodelers from 4 separate sites. One sand operative who had prepared for a bloody night stood there holding it. Are the people of Konoha all fools, leaving something this important lying about? Then the research departments of 4 great villages gathered around the odd metal lumps and were collectively defeated. An experienced Iwa ninja stared at the markings. It looks somewhat like a sealing formula, and it is completely different. The core seems to store chakra. Take it apart. Wait, be careful. There was a small explosion and a smell of burning in Sands Institute, and a man climbed out of the dust looking at the pieces and wanting to cry. Why does this thing explode as soon as you disassemble it? The same scene happened in Cloud. And in Mr. Any attempt to force the capacitor's core structure produced a chakra disturbance and then a self-destruct. The lightning daimyo screamed down a communicator that the technology was right in front of them, that the Land of Fire was using it smoothly, and that his own people could not even work out how it was made, and it exploded when touched. The third Raikage, gray-faced, explained that the formulae were beyond their current analysis, and that they carried the traces of one clan's sealing arts. The Uzumaki. Uzumaki? Have they allied with Konoha? Investigate the Land of Whirlpools immediately. And when that report came back, 4 great powers felt robbed a second time, because we had moved too fast. While they were still fumbling with hardware, the Land of Fire had publicly announced a formal military alliance with the Land of Whirlpools and stationed a considerable force there to assist with defense, which is a diplomatic sentence that means, this is ours now, come and see what happens. Worse, the roads did not stop at our border. Small countries had suspected a trick when the Land of Fire offered goodwill, and then watched their bridges actually get built and changed their minds. Our influence was spreading along the roads. They considered war and dropped it for 2 reasons. The risk was unknown, and, the deeper one, if the Land of Fire had genuinely moved ninjutsu into production, then the position of a ninja had changed, and a war that killed all the ninja would leave the technology useless even to whoever won it. So the 4 powers arrived at an unusual consensus: courtesy first, apply diplomatic pressure, trade for the technical data, bleed a little more if necessary, get the technology, then measure us. Takeshi exhaled over the daimyo's message and said, everything as Hisoka predicted. And he remembered the line I had used to sell him the whole program. Teacher, war is the continuation of politics. As long as interests are distributed properly, there are no irreconcilable conflicts, and war does not break out. He could see it now. When ninjas stop being instruments of slaughter and become resources that generate economic value, any country has to weigh a genuinely heavy price before starting anything. He let himself think, standing at that window, that a hatred 3 centuries old might find its end in his generation. However, in this world, there are always people who do not wish to see peace. In a cave, in the dark, something that was half black and shaped like a man was having the worst week of its very long life. Bastard Hisoka, bastard Takeshi Koga, bastard Land of Fire. 1,000 years of patience, 1,000 years of standing behind the right shoulders and whispering, on the verge of steering Kenji Ryosuke into the plan that ends with a moon-sized illusion and the return of its mother. And some snake in Konoha had pushed the entire ninja world toward peace. Its problem was structural, and I want you to appreciate it because it is genuinely elegant. It had sold Ryosuke on that plan as the only possible road to a world without conflict or suffering. And if Ryosuke ever learned that peace was achievable by other means, and that ninja were being elevated rather than consumed, then why would he keep listening? 1,000 years of work becomes a joke, and the rest of the plan is interlocked. Even after awakening the full power, Ryosuke's ruined body could not hold it long enough to cast the final technique, so it needed a descendant of a certain bloodline whose vitality could carry it to be steered into reviving Ryosuke's real body, then into collecting the tailed beasts, then into everything else. And its chosen candidates were the Uzumaki of the Land of Whirlpools, which the Land of Fire had just publicly placed under protection, so it had to make chaos, it had to reignite a war. A few days later, the daimyo of Wind, Earth, Lightning, and Water almost simultaneously received an anonymous intelligence report. The report said that Konoha's secret laboratory had built an individual combat weapon shaped like a handheld launcher, that it could be used by an ordinary person after simple training, that pulling the trigger delivered B rank, or even A rank, ninjutsu, that swapping the cartridge changed the element, and that the Land of Fire had ordered accelerated development for mass production to equip its army within a few years. It came with blurry blueprints and test photographs, a soldier in plain armor holding a metal tube, fire pouring out of the muzzle. A small mountain coming down. The lightning daimyo broke his table with one hand. Are they trying to conquer the world with these? Because it is not a technological edge. It changes the form of warfare. Let the land of fire keep going, and it fields an army of walking turrets. The Earth Daimyo, to his credit, noticed the problem. The source of this intelligence is strange. Our people could not trace the delivery channel at all. It was as if it appeared out of thin air. And wind answered for all of them. Who cares if it's strange? If it's true and we do nothing now, it will be too late to cry about it. The doubt lost to the fear, because the question was never whether the land of fire wanted to. It was whether the land of fire could. Within days, 4 powers who had spent the previous month scheming against each other over how to buy our technology agreed on one thing: stop the land of fire. And when it is crippled, the technology will be lying there for whoever can reach it first. All 4 villages declared at once and came at us from 4 directions. Their reasoning was not stupid either. This was the last window, before mass production created a gap nobody could cross. Miss it and be picked off one at a time and end as vassals. So Konoha, in the middle of the most productive decade in its history, went to war on 3 fronts. East, against Cloud, which was the heaviest, with the Hokage personally in command and Goro's route behind him. South, against Mist, with the younger elites, Ayame and Kyozo, and the Whirlpool forces, whose population is small and whose sealing arts turned out to matter enormously. And west, against the combined armies of Sand and Iwa, where the supreme commander was me. The third Kazakage nearly twisted his own mustache off. Has old Takeshi lost his mind, sending a brat against the combined forces of 2 villages? In Iwa's command tent, the teacups rattled because Fudo had conquered a great deal of the world with a technique that erases matter and had never in his life been insulted like that. They arrived at the same conclusion independently and simultaneously. Not only will we win, we will win in a way that makes that boy lose every scrap of face he has. Dawn. Endless yellow sand. The Kazakage rose into the air on a bed of iron sand that surged behind him like something alive. Fudo, refusing to be upstaged, clapped his hands, hauled a house-sized boulder out of the ground, and rode it up to hover beside him. This was not theater for its own sake. For a ninja village, prestige decides the volume and quality of commissions, so they wanted to announce in the most spectacular way available that a Kage's dignity is not something you challenge. The fact that a mere Hisoka was not worth 2 Kage joining hands made it a better insult, not a worse one. Their armies started cheering. Our side did not. Because I had barely fought in public for years, and what I had shown at the Chunin exams had already been past most jonin, and this was 1 against 2 of the 5 strongest people alive. Can Hisoka-sama really do this alone? And Ryuji, who is not a fighter and has never been a fighter, screamed at all of them. What the hell do you know? Hisoka-sama is the strongest. I walked out in front of the line and looked up. The 2 of you. It is still not too late to take your people and go home. The Kazakage laughed with genuine fury and threw everything he had. A sky-blotting black tsunami of iron sand at my formation. And Fudo, simultaneously, dropped his boulder under a technique that multiplies its weight dozens of times, both of them aiming to annihilate an army and its will to fight in the same second. I kept smiling, and then I let my chakra go, and natural energy came in with it past anything a ninja does. Scales around the eyelids, horns from the forehead, the second version of it, which is another thing that came out of the laboratory, and which skips the accumulation stage entirely. I raised my right hand at the black tsunami. Sage art, inorganic reanimation, which is Ryuchi Cave's signature and which gives lifeless matter life and a will of its own. The sea of iron sand stopped dead 100 meters from my front line, frozen as though somebody had paused the world. The Kazakage's pupils contracted. He pushed harder, and it did not obey him. He had lost control of iron sand, he, of all people. Then it got worse for him, because the frozen sand writhed and reshaped and condensed into dozens of colossal drills and turned and screamed upward at Fudo's falling boulder. Amplified with Sage Chakra, their hardness and penetration reached a number that should not exist, and the super-weighted rock that had been intended to pulp an army came apart in mid-air, and the fragments landed neatly on the open ground to either side of my formation. The allied ninja were completely lost. Why is Lord Kazakage attacking Lord Tsuchikage's technique? Are our own Kage fighting each other? Fudo turned around, displeased, because 2 old men not getting along is one thing, and undermining a colleague in front of both armies is another. And the Kazakage said, in the voice of a man who would like to be somewhere else, that, I can't control that iron sand anymore. Fudo looked at him. Nobody in the world is better at controlling iron sand than you. Then both of them looked down at me, and I released Sage Mode and put both hands on the ground, and 2 large complex formulae spread out from my palms. A summoning. Now. Does the boy think a beast will fix this? Heh. Why don't the 2 of you find some people you're a little more familiar with to play against? White smoke came off the desert, and 2 very tall figures walked out of it. One in magnificent crimson armor, hands on his hips, laughing at the sky. Ha 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 ha, is it finally my turn? The other in deep blue, restrained, coughing into his fist. Brother, mind your image, there are a great many juniors standing behind us. Both Kage said the same obscenity at the same time. Hayashi Jiro. Genjutsu, the Kazakage said out loud to nobody. It must be Genjutsu. Because it had to be. Old Takeshi having the boy stall for time. Such a petty trick, said Fudo, whose voice was not steady. Dares to be shown off in front of me. And Jiro gave them no time at all. One step forward, one clap. Wood release, deep forest emergence. The ground heaved, and enormous trees came up through and over the entire combined army of two great villages, and the branches whipped around each individual ninja like living things. One technique, one instant. Several thousand trained ninja, elite jonin included, every single one of them bound, with no room to resist. I stood there and looked at the wailing green forest that had been an invasion, and neither Kage could produce a sound because they had just been shown the real thing. Gentlemen, I said. Can we talk now? Their faces went darker than the bottom of a pot. Fight what, exactly? Never mind whether the two of them together could handle the first Hokage. Every man in both their armies was in my hand, and even if they escaped, they would be going home as commanders of nothing, and my methods were, from where they stood, extremely alarming. If this boy can produce the first and second Hokage, what exactly stops him producing Kenji Ryosuke? I watched Fudo's scalp crawl in real time as that thought arrived. The Kazakage swallowed. Lord Hisoka, we can talk. Fudo produced a smile, uglier than crying. Let's talk nicely, young man. Don't be so impulsive. So the Western Front ended without a single casualty on either side before it started. The report reached the other two fronts inside a day. The third Mizukaga's pipe hand shook so badly that ash went down his own front. Jiro. Deep forest emergence. Thousands captured in one move. He rubbed his eyes and checked whether it was Konoha disinformation, and the source was absolutely reliable. Cloud's report reached its Raikage at almost the same hour, and he read the three names, Jiro, Kenshin, Hisoka, several times, with his face going black, and both of them, holding advantages on their own fronts, gave the same order, all troops, withdraw. It was not that they did not want to fight, the opponent was cheating. Jiro, whom they had finally, patiently outlived, was back. And so the second great ninja war, which was supposed to consume the world, was a lot of thunder and very little rain. In the cave, Shadow Zephyr was beside itself. What? What is going on? It had been waiting so happily for mutual annihilation and rivers of blood, and then Ryosuke, who had not moved in a long time, stirred and put a hand against his own chest. Because there is only one person in all of recorded history who ever made him feel that, the cave roof came apart in roots and branches, and sunlight fell on a withered body for the first time in years, and a tall figure in bright red armor walked through the dust with his hair loose and an expression I could not read from where I was standing. Long time no see, Ryosuke. Jiro, the voice had not been used in a very long time, and the pride in it was completely intact. Are you pitying me with that look? He stood up. He could barely do it. His eyes were still knives, and he could tell it was not an illusion and not a disguise, but the genuine article, brimming with life and chakra, which must have been the cruelest part. Jiro shook his head, and whatever was in his face hardened into a decision, and Ryosuke's ancient body exploded into motion, and a withered hand went straight for the vitals, even at the very end of his road. Still him. Lord Ryosuke, this is a trap, Zephyr shouted and moved, and golden chains came out of the shadows all around it and bound it in place. What? A sealing technique? Then several blue crystals landed around it, and the light between them closed into a square, and it tried to change shape and hit a wall it could not pass through. This is Sage Chakra. It's you, because there is exactly one man in the ninja world using it at that level. I walked out of the dark and had a good long look at what I had caught. You didn't really think that intelligence about terrain devices and single-soldier chakra weapons was so easy to steal, did you? I crouched down to its eye level. Little Blackie, this is a luxury single room, tailor-made. Do you like it? Here is the whole thing, since it took 2 years to set up. I knew that it existed. I knew what it could do. I knew what its 1,000-year plan was, and roughly when. So I wrote the secret documents myself and left them somewhere they could be stolen. Not to mislead it, although that was a pleasant side effect. First, to watch how it steals information and how it hides while doing it, and second, to attach markers. The moment it touched those papers, it was carrying a beacon, and I simply followed it home. It was stunned in a way I found genuinely satisfying. Schemed against. A clown jumping around inside somebody else's script. And impossible, because other than its mother, nobody in the world should even know it exists. Behind us, the fight ended, because it had to. Ryosuke is a legend. He was also old, his body had failed, and he had not yet awakened the thing that would have made him unanswerable. Against a full-strength impure world reincarnation Jiro, with infinite chakra and a body that cannot be destroyed, he had almost nothing. He went down gasping and looked up at an opponent who was not even breathing hard, and something complicated crossed that old face, and I would swear on my own laboratory that part of it was relief. What a powerful technique, to let the dead reappear like this. Indeed, Kenshin and a very excellent junior improved and completed it together. Jiro sat down beside him, in the dirt, in his armor. To be honest, the first time I was summoned, I was rather startled myself. Kenshin, is it? That one really is an out-and-out genius at developing forbidden techniques. A pause that went on slightly too long. I never thought that I, Kenji Ryosuke, would eventually fall under such an incredible jutsu, and his voice went out with the desolation of a man who has arrived at the end of the road he chose. Jiro was about to tell him about the reforms, about the factories and the roads, and a peace that might genuinely be achievable now, and found that his friend had gone quiet and that the light had gone out of the one eye, permanently. He reached over and closed it, and then, swish, Kenshin appeared beside the corpse, said absolutely nothing, produced an enormous scroll, made 3 seals, and sealed the entire body inside it. Because the same mistake was not going to be made twice. Last time it was his brother's momentary softness that cost the world 60 years. Jiro's mouth twitched. I say, Kenshin, could you consider your elder brother's feelings just once? If you want to reminisce with Kenji Ryosuke, there will be plenty of opportunities. Have Hisoka summon him again and talk to your heart's content. He turned, and his gaze went past his brother entirely. Now, we have more important things to do. And the black thing shaking inside the barrier in my hand found the first Hokage, the second Hokage, and a man who smiles more cunningly than a fox, all looking at it simultaneously, with research and scrutiny and curiosity. I am told that it went cold from the head down, although I want to note for accuracy that it did not have a head. Its exact words were, "It's over, Mother Kaguya. Why do these guys look at me like I'm a rare experimental material?" I walked out of that cave with 2 trophies. A 1,000-year-old conspiracy in a sage art barrier, and Kenji Ryosuke's corpse in a scroll sealed personally by the man who buried him the first time. Weeks later, there was a summit in the neutral land of Iron, and calling it a summit is generous. It was an accountability hearing. The 4 losing Kage came braced for the worst. Ceded territory, reparations, handing over tailed beasts, possibly the forced dissolution of their villages. They had run every scenario and were praying that we would leave them a road home. Then Takeshi read out the terms, and all 4 of them stopped moving. Fudo actually said, "Are you perhaps lying?" and half came out of his chair, on the theory that his ears had finally gone. The terms were, reparations for our losses, and beyond that. We hope to jointly usher in a new era with your villages, an era in which the power of ninja is not used solely for mutual destruction, but for protection and construction. We are willing to share some technology and to send our people to assist your post-war reconstruction. Of course, to ensure the exchange proceeds and to demonstrate sincerity, each village will provide technical data in its own specialty and certain special chakra samples as a basis for joint research. A pause you could have parked a cart in. This is not a one-sided demand. It is for the common progress of the ninja world. There was a silence, and then 3 faces doing the same thing. The Reikage came out of his seat pointing. This is a disguised method of seizing our village's secret techniques and bloodline limits. Koga, don't be delusional, and it was Fudo who raised a hand and stopped him. Calm down, have you still not recognized the situation? The tiny old man did not look at him. I can agree on behalf of Iwagakure, on the condition that we see the Land of Fire's so-called sincerity, and that you provide corresponding technology in exchange. As it should be, said Takeshi, which was, of course, exactly what we wanted. Fudo, you old geezer, are you going to sell off the foundations of your own village? Not sell? Do you think we can defeat Hayashi Jiro with what we have? Fudo finally turned around. Don't forget, we started this war. Konoha only wants technology, not our lives. What more do you wish for? The Reikage sat down and did not say anything else. A joint 5-nation agreement on joint development and the promotion of peace was signed in the Land of Iron. Days later, the first boxes started arriving in Konoha under heavy escort, in an atmosphere you could have struck a match on. Storm release from Cloud, explosion release and lava release from Iwa, boiling release and ice release from Mist. Chakra samples belonging to several tailed beasts, and research archives, not their deepest secrets, but a beginning, mobilizing the research capacity of the entire ninja world, which had been the point of every single thing I had done since I was 6 years old, and which was now approximately half accomplished. The other half is harder. The other half is making them want to. So here is where I leave it. I woke up in a 6-year-old body, wearing the face of the man this world was going to spend the next 30 years being afraid of, in a village too poor to feed its own orphans. I had a laboratory I could not afford, and a technique I could not use in a fight, and I finished that decade with a bureau, a treaty, 4 great villages voluntarily mailing me their bloodlines, and the strongest man who ever lived working my night shift. That is the part I would like to end on, except for the jar, because the thing in my barrier is 1,000 years old, and it was never working for Ryosuke. It was working for its mother, and once I had it under a light and started asking questions, it told me what that plan actually ends with, and what she actually is, and where chakra actually came from. And I sat there and remembered a very old toad on a mountain that only exists in legends, telling me that the prophecy showed me bringing a great change to the ninja world, and that he could not tell whether it would be new life or destruction. And I remembered agreeing, out loud, that if this world were ever in danger of ending, I would do everything in my power to stop it. I have kept a great many promises since then. I have broken a few. I would like the record to show which ones were which, but that one is still open, and so is the jar.